Hello there. Thank you for taking a few minutes to stop by. I hope your day has been peaceful, or at least calm enough to enjoy a good story. Tonight, we're diving into the life of Catherine the Great, a German princess who somehow became Russia's Iron Queen. Not thanks to magic, nor because she was favored, but because she chose not to accept the fate handed to her. Catherine was sent to a foreign land, changed her name, her religion, and married a man with, let's say, rather strange interests. But instead of sinking, she learned to observe, stay silent, and quietly plan to change everything, patiently, but fiercely. This story has love, betrayal, ideals, reforms, and decisions that made all of Europe step back. And perhaps you might see a bit of yourself in her journey, especially when you're faced with the choice: accept or change. If the storytelling style speaks to you, feel free to subscribe, so you won't have to dig around later just to find that one spiky queen. But if you're not sure yet, just keep listening. The story is yours, told the way you want to feel it. By the way, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I'm recording this around midnight. Stories like this, when heard late at night, tend to linger, especially when the main character is hard to forget. Now imagine this: you're 14, living in Germany, when suddenly you're shipped off to Russia, where you know no one and can't speak a word. No one asks if you're ready. There's only a summons, a carriage, and a new title with responsibilities no one prepares you for. Catherine wasn't born to be a queen, but she lived like she always was. She learned Russian so well she spoke it better than her husband. She read philosophy in silence, wrote journals at night, and analyzed every glance in court. When her moment came, she didn't hesitate. She rode to the army camp and said clearly, "I am the ruler of Russia." No one stopped her, because she didn't wait for approval. She created agreement. So how did a teenage girl claim the throne and keep it for 34 years? Was she a pioneer of enlightenment, or just a master of power? To answer that, we need to start with the simplest things: a strange bed, a freezing morning, and the feeling of being lost inside a palace. Your first bed has no lace canopy, no soft pillows, and definitely no heating. It's an old wooden plank, harder than your stepmother's greetings, covered by a musty wool blanket. The smell? Like soaking socks in the rain for 3 days and airing them out in a wine cellar. The pillow is stuffed with straw, not clean straw, sometimes with rat fur and bits of sand. Every night, you sleep to the sound of wind whistling through cracks, cold enough that you bury your head into the pillow, like you're trying to escape the world. But the world doesn't let you escape, because just as you begin to dream, the bedbugs start their party. They don't bite to live. They bite to remind you you're still in Zerst. Some nights, you feel like you've caught smallpox from the bites. On better nights, getting 1 hour of sleep is a victory. You curl up, trying to trap warmth under the stiff fabric, while your knee touches the cold edge of the bed like a blade. They call it a princess bed, but it feels like being held in a stone cellar. The ceiling is so low you might bump your head if you sit up too fast. The walls crack, exhaling cold, damp air. At night, mice run like soldiers in drills, and wind slices through your nightgown like razors. You wake up before anyone else, not because you're diligent, but because you never really slept. Your body aches, your thighs are numb from the cold, your fingers stiff like dead twigs. You hear footsteps outside, heavy, hurried, like someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. A servant quietly opens the door, bringing a washcloth soaked in water, cold as well water can get. You bend down, splash your face. Clarity doesn't come fast, but the sting hits your forehead like a slap. Your eyes glance at a small bronze mirror, warped, cracked at the edges, reflecting a child about to become an adult. Hair tangled from wool blankets, skin dry from mist, lips cracked from wind, but the eyes are lighting up with something else. You no longer cry, because here, crying just makes your face heavier, and tears aren't any warmer than the blankets. You step out of the room in a thick dress, stiff like armor made from old tablecloths. Every step echoes with fabric rubbing, not the sound of power, but of survival. You see servants passing by, and none of them smile. They also sleep in musty blankets and share bedbugs with the nobles. There's no perfume in the air, only the scent of wilted radish, unwashed fur coats, and half-burned firewood. Outside, winter claws at the doors with icy fingernails. But you still have to attend morning meetings like a true royal. The maid adjusts your coat, and her hands are as cold as kitchen stones. No one has time to warm up. You think of last night's bed, the restless sleep, and wonder. Is this a beginning or a punishment? A princess should have an embroidery room, golden curtains, and soft music in the morning. But here, you only get drafty tiles and a few bedbugs that still aren't full. There is no pleasant morning in Zerst, just mornings without illness, and that alone is a blessing. You wipe your own face, tie your hair with an old thread, and stand in front of the mirror once more. Not to admire, but to remind yourself, today you won't fall. Your eyes stare straight, no more trembling, though your fingers are still purple from the cold, and your stomach empty since yesterday. You know you have to go out, sit at the table, smile on cue, speak just enough, and remember everything. There's no one whispering, "You've got this," but you still rise, simply because there's no other choice. Outside, the sun hasn't risen, but in your mind, calculations have already begun to warm you up. One more day will pass, and you'll survive. Not by magic, but by memory and sheer will. The room is cold, but inside you, something has just sparked. Small but real. It's not hope, it's intention. The intention not to stay in Zerst forever, because that bed was never meant for a queen. Even if for now you must sleep in it for a few more winters. If you imagine Russian palaces with marble bathrooms and flowing hot water, well, sorry to disappoint. The first bathroom Catherine entered had rough stone walls and water dripping from the ceiling like quiet sobs. The smell? Hard to describe. Half cold ash, half like unwashed diapers from last month. On the floor, a dented brass basin lay waiting to be stepped on. No toilet, just an old wooden bench where everything happened in silence and cold drafts. The wind in a Russian bathroom doesn't just chill. It scratches at your neck like the nails of a strict German nanny. Catherine sat there, feeling, for the first time, a shiver of dread under the Empire's flag. Every sound echoed like a cannon blast. The stone walls didn't hold warmth, but they held noise perfectly. Privacy, that concept doesn't exist here. Only the habit of being overheard through walls remains. A servant waits outside, barely breathing, but you know they hear everything. In Russia, manners mean pretending to be deaf. Catherine quickly realized, to survive here, you must learn Russian before toilet paper, because there was no paper. Really, the closest substitute was a few dull gray cloth scraps, washed and reused. They weren't soft, and once, Catherine found one embroidered with Elizabeth, perhaps from the former Empress. Every bathroom trip was a test of both physiology and ethics. Silence was hard. Keeping your faith was harder. The hand-washing water sat in a stone basin by the door, so cold it could turn a boiled egg back into a raw one. Every morning, Catherine had to wash her face there. The water numbed her skin, but at least it distracted from her cracked lips. The mirror on the wall was brass dark, warped, but perfectly reflected the fatigue of whoever stood before it. Every toilet trip was a psychological exam. No trembling hands, no noise, and don't ask why everyone coughs softly when you exit. Catherine learned to identify people by the scent their bathroom left behind. That's why she held her breath walking past the lower hall. The guest lavatories were more private, but the water was still cold, and the bedbugs still picked the worst time to strike. Some days, Catherine sat silently on the wooden seat, reading new Russian words carved into the wall. Maybe a soldier did it, or someone once hopeless. Invisibility is a skill, she remembered that one, while scratching the damp cloth on her knee from yesterday's wash. Each day she spoke Russian a little better, and each day she let go of her old idea of privacy a little more. She learned when the bathroom was cleaned, usually too late, and also learned, never use the third towel from the left. A new habit formed. Take a deep breath before entering, then hold it for exactly 48 seconds. No more, no less. At first, she smiled at servants when leaving the bathroom. After a week, just a nod. After a month, direct eye contact. She never complained, but she recorded. In her mind, in her notes, in her eyes. Because even mold can become a weapon. Russians say cold builds character. Catherine thought, cold just makes you miss your mom's wooden toilet seat. She figured if she could survive winter bathrooms in Russia, the throne might not be that far off. Though each time she bent to wash her hands, she shivered. Not sure if it was water or century-old tears. Privacy didn't exist here. She got used to it like people get used to ticking clocks. Annoying, then silence. One night, she used the bathroom at midnight. No lights, no sound. Just moonlight slicing through the window frame. She saw her shadow on the wall, small, trembling, but upright, and knew that shadow wasn't fading soon. From that night on, she wasn't afraid of the bathroom. She was afraid she might get used to it. Because once you accept the smell, the chill, and the stares, you're one step closer to the crown. Not through a coronation, but through surviving every filthy towel and whispered judgment. Catherine learned Russian. But even more, she learned how to walk like she belonged, even walking out of there. And funny enough, after a few weeks, she was the one teaching the maids how to make towels stay clean longer. Not out of love, out of certainty. This place would be hers. Soon enough. But before changing the empire, she had to survive breakfast. And breakfast here didn't smell much better. Her first breakfast at the Russian palace was called a ritual, but it felt like a chewing contest. Catherine entered the dining room with dozens of nobles, everyone in fur, yet somehow no one smelled good. The table was long, tablecloth folded neatly, candles flickering like old paintings. But the smell? Like fermented porridge. First course, kasha, buckwheat porridge boiled in bone broth, meaning water that once saw bones pass through. It was thick as hand-mixed cement, clinging to the spoon like it begged her not to eat it. Catherine tried, but each bite echoed like plaster scraping against stone. With it came black bread, good enough to hammer nails if you had no tools. No need to toast it, it was tough enough to outlive winter. And Russian noble opinions. Butter? None. Cheese? Also no. Just congealed fat. Looked like candle wax gone bad. The drink was weak beer, but warm. Not cold enough to be tasty, not hot enough to make sense. She looked around, everyone eating like it was a reward. Maybe they knew strange reactions got noticed here. She faked slow chewing. In her head, comparing it to the cheap oatmeal from Germany, the one she now missed. Back home, at least she ate in silence. Here, every spoon hitting a plate was part of an unwilling orchestra. The smell of porridge mixed with half-dried fur coats, neighboring body odor, and the suspicion in a noble's stare. An old nobleman on her left offered her some meat jelly. Looked like jelly, smelled like a janitor's rag. Catherine nodded, smiled slightly, then cut a piece. The jelly wobbled like it disagreed. The meat didn't melt in her mouth. It just sat there. A reminder, welcome to Russia. She grabbed the beer glass, hoping to rinse the aftertaste. But it smelled like millet soaked in old cloth. The server stood straight, pouring like he was in a contest for stiffest arms, not royal service. Catherine glanced at her husband. He was busy stacking spoons like toy soldiers, not eating a thing. While others ate to survive, Peter seemed to eat just to play war games in his head. Catherine kept her head down, silently counting minutes. She wasn't hungry anymore. She just wanted it to end. One time, she tried hiding a piece of bread in her napkin, but it was too hard, it tore the linen. She started missing mornings in Zerbst, where at least cold porridge still smelled like rice. Here, hot porridge smelled like reused spoons. A servant brought in boiled eggs. The yolks were green, meaning they had passed the threshold of existence. Catherine stopped eating. She smiled politely, set down her napkin, and waited for someone to change the topic or for the weather to change. An old lady on her right started describing last season's smoked venison. Catherine thought it sounded like a pathology report. She developed a new skill, smiling gracefully while hearing horror stories. It would be useful later. Breakfast ended with black tea, no sugar, no milk, and no need. Catherine took a sip and stared at the cup, as if expecting an apology. None came. People say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. In Russia, it's a test of body and spirit, and you must pass. If you don't finish it, people might think you don't like Russia. Catherine ate enough to stay alive, but not enough to believe in warmth. She left the table, stomach light not from fullness, but from relief. Relief from stomach torture. Behind her, servants cleared the plates, once white porcelain, now tinted by time and mineral water. Catherine stepped out of the dining room, feeling as if she had just passed an exam, with her teeth. She said nothing, but in her mind, she noted, reform the kitchen. Soon, the palace was grand, but after a breakfast like that, the warmest place was the hallway air. And when Catherine saw a servant bring out a wash basin for hand cleaning, she simply nodded. At that point, anything seemed edible. At least breakfast taught her one thing. Not everything royal is worth envying, especially the spoon. Catherine once thought a princess gown would feel like clouds and smell like cinnamon. In reality, each formal dress in Russia was stiff like armor and smelled like old blankets stored in a wine cellar. Dresses required assistance. If you dressed yourself, you'd be shaped like a moving mushroom. The first corset she wore squeezed her so tight, Catherine felt like she was being prayed for. Aggressively. One day, she fainted during tea, not from emotion, but from lack of oxygen. And that was normal here. If you didn't faint in formal wear, you weren't royal enough. Peter, her husband, chose to wear military uniform, even to bed. To look cool, he said, before climbing into bed with his belt and jingling medals. Catherine spent over 30 minutes undressing, 15 more to remove the wig, and 10 minutes to search for lice. Yes, they were always there, on collars, in lace, under hats, and especially fond of velvet lining. Once, she scratched until bleeding, thinking it was an allergy, until she saw a louse dancing on her hand. Servants suggested herbal perfume water, but it only made the lice happier. Catherine began to suspect that every Russian noble had a personal insect collection. Clothes weren't washed often, because body odor is royal identity. She once tried sneaking some items to be washed. Result: scolded for removing the spirit of the outfit. The thick wool socks she thought would warm her turned out to be excellent scent retainers. She once smelled memories of a cold day last year from those socks. Her shoes were stiff as wood. 10 minutes in them and you'd know exactly how many bones are in your foot. So Catherine learned to walk slowly, not for elegance, but to keep her toenails. Hair wasn't washed, only combed with a bone brush, the lice's favorite place, right after collars. One time she accidentally said "so itchy" during a meeting. People thought she was talking about politics. Every night, Catherine had to choose. Sleep with a thick fur hat, hot as an oven, or without it and freeze like ice. She chose the hat, then got up at 3 a.m. to pick lice out of the fur trim. One time, she saw Peter counting lice on his coat, like they were medals of honor. "They're more loyal than my soldiers," he laughed. Catherine didn't know whether to nod or run. Royal gowns were so heavy they needed their own chairs. Otherwise, you'd topple like a paper boat. Catherine once nearly fell into the fireplace when her gown wrapped around her leg. Luckily, only the hem caught fire. Since then, her dress always had a faint burnt smell, like the half-scorched memory of her marriage. One time, she heard a rustle inside her sleeve. Something crawled out. No one asked because everyone understood. When you live in a palace and ask yourself while changing, "Does this carry any creatures?" Then, that's when you know you've become truly Russian. And nothing proves your loyalty to the empire more than still wearing it, even when your whole body itches. Catherine grew used to lice brushing across her neck like wind. She even named a few particularly energetic ones. She tried folding her gown the German way. The maids looked at her like she'd just murdered a god. "Princesses don't fold dresses. Dresses must stand on their own," they said with religious conviction. Catherine smiled politely, but in her head, she was already planning the laundry revolution. Perhaps right after educational reform, she'd declare war on royal odors. Every time she changed, Catherine told herself, "This is the price of power." But what kind of power itches like this? If you ever thought a princess gown was a dream, Catherine would gladly give you one, and a few lice as souvenirs. And that night, like every night, she slept with a prickling sensation all over. Not from emotion, but from bugs partying. One evening, Catherine had a toothache. The kind that throbs with every heartbeat, you know that type? She thought it was just mild sensitivity, maybe from smiling too much at her in-laws. But by midnight, the pain spread to her temple. Her left eye started twitching. Each heartbeat felt like a hammer hitting her jaw. Catherine couldn't speak anymore. She asked for a doctor but was denied. Why? The former empress was still alive and hadn't approved Catherine to have her teeth checked. Yes, you heard right. In this empire, even dental checkups required permission. Servants were only allowed to call a tooth man, basically an old guy with a rusty pair of pliers. Catherine would rather endure the pain than let him touch her mouth. She tried to endure it, but by morning, she had a 39 degrees Celsius fever. Blurry vision, dry mouth. Catherine thought she was dying. Honestly, she wasn't far off. A nurse whispered to her, "Be careful. They might be drugging you." Catherine didn't know who they were, but in Russia, that warning is always valid. Could be Peter. Could be her mother-in-law. Could be the cook. Or yesterday's napkin. She began vomiting. Even with nothing left inside, she kept throwing up. The nurse gave her a kind of drink. Catherine drank it, then lost consciousness for 10 minutes. When she woke, the toothache was still there. But her mind started to wonder, was it really a toothache? Or was it a disguise for a poisoning attempt? A palace conspiracy starting from a tooth's nerve? Sounds crazy, but in Russia, nothing's too far-fetched. Catherine wrote to her mother, asking for medicine. The letter was intercepted. The old empress said, "Women must learn to endure." Catherine smiled, then cried from the pain. Peter said, "Try soaking your tooth in vodka." She tried and nearly passed out from the sting. That day, Catherine ate nothing. Just sat by the window, hand on her cheek, heart full of doubt. An old servant walked by, silently placing a handkerchief with old bloodstains in her hand. That was the welcome gift to the Russian court. Everyone had lost a tooth, and some, their lives. That night, Catherine curled up in blankets, her jaw still throbbing with every heartbeat. She no longer feared toothaches. She feared teeth might not be the only things to fall out. For the first time, Catherine dreamt of Germany, where teeth were pulled by appointment. She woke to find her cheek wet, not knowing if it was tears or pus. And like every princess studying abroad, she learned her first lesson. A toothache could be political. After the fever, Catherine was summoned to court etiquette lessons. On the very day she had nothing but pond water tea. She wasn't allowed a break. No one was. In Russia, taking a break means, "Are you dead?" From early morning, she had to learn bows, curtsies, and standing still for 3 hours without itching. Try standing still with lice crawling under your dress. Then you can judge. They taught Catherine to wash her hands with snow. "This is ceremony, not hygiene," they said. At noon, she had to attend meetings, though no one asked her opinion, only that she didn't yawn. She studied Russian history, a subject with lots of blood, little logic, and no room for questions. In the afternoon, she read diplomatic letters, then got asked, why doesn't Germany love Russia more? As if she represented the entire German nation. Once, she suggested changing the way royal decrees were written, only to be told, women change scarves, not laws. One night, Catherine stayed up late reading the old constitution, only to see it thrown into the fire the next morning. Peter played with toy soldiers. She cleaned up the mess. Sounds familiar? One day, a foreign ambassador visited. Catherine had to memorize a whole French greeting. But just as she stood to speak, Peter sneezed, and the whole room laughed at her non-Russian accent. Catherine smiled faintly, then returned to her room and wrote in her flickering candlelight journal. Today, I was only allowed to exist. Every day's work was the same, only the judges changed, not the pressure. Each morning was a battle, against stares, against insinuations, and against herself. One day, she walked the hall and saw blood not fully cleaned from last night's execution. But she still had to smile, because smiling was the only weapon not yet confiscated. Catherine began drawing mental maps: who stood where, who disliked whom, who stayed silent that day. And from that, she forged her weapon: observation, something Peter never understood. Sometimes she sat in crowds, looking lost. But in truth, she was noting every nod. One day, a servant asked, "Is your Majesty well?" She nodded, though her hands shook from hunger, starving for information, starving for power, starving for a chance to do more than survive. Catherine once dreamed of riding horses like a queen. Now she rode disappointment through each day. Peter told her, "You don't need to do anything, just be pretty." She looked at him, then the mirror. There was nothing pretty in sunken eyes and dreams postponed day after day. But she didn't fall. Each time she rose from a ceremonial stumble, she gained another political lesson. Each insult for not being Russian taught her how to respond with a glance. And every time she felt useless, she reminded herself, Peter is the one digging his own grave. Catherine wasn't a fairy tale princess. She was a historian writing in her own blood, drop by drop. Her job had no salary, no breaks, no praise. But there was one thing no one could take from her: willpower. Peter ruled by title. Catherine, she learned to rule by patience. And you know what's funny? Even the floor cleaner saw that clearer than her husband did. "Anything new today?" Peter asked. Catherine smiled. "No, just learned one more thing." She didn't say what it was, but in her journal it was marked with 3 exclamation points. Her task was to live as if no one watched while watching everything. And when the time came, she wouldn't ask for permission. She would act, not as a wife but as someone rewriting history. In the Russian court, women weren't allowed to make mistakes but had to do everything. Catherine had no friends, only servants and watchers. Her maid slept by the door. If Catherine cried, they'd hear. If she whispered, they'd write it down. Her mother-in-law had a face colder than marble and could smile while sentencing someone to death. Every time Catherine asked about the future, the answer was always stories of princesses being silenced. Not metaphorically, literally silenced with mouth locks. They said women must be gentle, obedient, and grateful they weren't burned. A maid named Anna once dropped a tablecloth. The next day, Anna vanished. Children in the palace, unless princes, were just crying decorations. Catherine once saw a 4-year-old stand for 2 hours just to bow at the right moment. Bow wrong, a slap. Bow late, sleep outside in the snow. Character building, adults called it. The child just coughed until he lost his voice. Catherine once saw a girl with a swollen face still forced to teach etiquette to the prince. In the palace, women weren't allowed to be sick. If tired, they had to faint gracefully. Catherine tried once, collapsed during a banquet. Result? Scolded for spilling wine on a noble's dress. Women had rights. The right to be silent, the right to starve, and the right to be blamed when the king sneezed. When Catherine asked, "What if I'm wrong?" a housekeeper replied, "Being wrong is a woman's nature." Peter played with toy soldiers. Girls in the palace were trained to serve Peter when they grew up. A 6-year-old once whispered, "I want to learn to read," and was taken away to learn how to pour tea. Catherine began hiding books in her dress. She taught girls to read at noon in the storage room. They whispered each word like reciting a prayer. One day, her mother-in-law found out. Catherine was banned from speaking to the girls for corrupting noble character. Noble character, according to them, meant knowing how to obey, stay silent, and be a man's backdrop. Older women learned to hold their breath, literally, when passing guards in the hallway, because someone was once dragged away just for breathing too annoyingly. In the palace, women were flowers, but flowers plucked petal by petal, day by day. Catherine knew that to survive, she had to become a flower with thorns. But first, she had to learn to smile while knowing someone was watching her from behind the curtain. One night, she looked in the mirror and asked herself, "Who am I without hope?" The answer was a walking shadow, but Catherine refused to live like a shadow. She remembered every word from the women around her. The words swallowed, the dimmed eyes. She didn't cry. She wrote. In her journal, she wrote, "If I ever rule, no girl will have to serve tea while running a fever." If, a small word, holding thousands of silenced voices. Catherine wasn't born a queen, but she was born a witness. She remembered every woman who had been forced into silence. She remembered every child who learned to bow before they learned to speak. And she remembered this. If you want to change something, you can't keep bowing forever. She lifted her head, not because she was allowed to, but because she couldn't take it anymore. In the Russian palace, if you weren't royalty, you cleaned what royalty left behind. Catherine once thought royal baker sounded nice, until she saw dough kneaded by foot. That baker had lost 2 toes. Not from the oven, but from frostbite, necrosis, and snapping like twigs. Another noble job, scenting the royal clothes. Sounds romantic, right? It meant standing in a sealed warehouse full of cheap perfume. No wind, no windows, and no sense of smell after 3 months. People in that job called themselves the breathless ones. In the kitchens, someone tasted food not to check flavor, but to test for poison. "If you survive, I'll eat," Peter once told the chef. If not, then they'd just swap in someone new. One man's job was to polish the queen's shoes with his tongue. No joke, it was a real tradition. Catherine heard of it and ordered it banned. But the stench haunted the hallway for a week. Shoemakers for the army had hands full of metal shards, eyes swollen from smoke. But it was still considered lucky work, since they weren't beaten. The man who made hats for Peter had to measure every strand of hair, then got punished for unroyal stitching. Another job, wiping sweat from the guards' faces while they stood still in snowstorms. Not a joke. Every 30 minutes, someone had to wipe them to stop them from collapsing. The guards stood like statues. The wipers shook like reeds. Another tough job, changing the veils over statues of old tsars whenever foreign guests visited. You had to climb high, never show your face, and if you got tangled, you'd fall with the old regime. Catherine once saw a woman 7 months pregnant still doing that job. Why? Because she's the only one not afraid of heights. In the palace, you could be a royal embroiderer, yet still live in a damp basement. Embroidery required sharp eyes, steady hands, and a mind calm enough to ignore the screaming above. A girl named Irene once said, "Each stitch is a day I don't go mad." Catherine gave her an oil lamp. She cried like she'd never seen light before, because in the palace, light was luxury, madness was free. Every palace job sounded royal until you actually did it. Catherine wrote, "This isn't an empire. It's a sweatshop with a king as the factory boss. And everyone in it was a gear, screeching quietly until it snapped." Peter didn't know their names. Catherine remembered them all, because one day, she'd need to know who was still alive, and who wasn't, when the tide turned. When Catherine first arrived in Russia, it felt like winter was testing how long she could last. You think a palace has fireplaces? It does, but just enough to keep the nobleman's cats warm. Her bedroom felt like a meat locker, unless you measured temperature by how your breath froze mid-curse. The blankets were thick, but stiff as doormats, and smelled like an unwashed artillery coat. Catherine once wrote, "I woke up with purple toes and a bedbug biting my ear. No one found it strange. They just said, Russian bedbugs are bigger than German ones, but more polite. By day, you wore 3 layers. By night, you wore the same because if you took them off, you might not wake up again. In winter, you learned to sleep without moving. Each turn felt like touching a frozen stone. It got so cold that the wash basin water froze while you were still looking in the mirror. Summer was different, not cold. Just smelled like a gym locker sealed for 2 years. No fans. Walls didn't breathe. Curtains trapped heat like clay pots. Catherine once fled her room because she couldn't stand the sweat smell coming from the statue in the corner. Peter wore his full military uniform even in summer because morale mattered more than sweat glands. Catherine's maid once fainted at noon, revived with a basin of water, hotter than her own body. In the palace, summer meant breeding rats, clouds of flies, and windows that only welcomed more heat. Once Catherine opened a window, hoping for breeze, only to see a soot oven and a pile of scorched geese. One day it hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. A guard collapsed. Peter replaced him with a statue. Catherine didn't laugh. She had perfume scattered along the halls, hoping to outmatch the royal body odor. Russians were used to the weather. Catherine got used to pretending not to smell it. Winter froze her stiff. Summer melted her limp. Both lit her brain with quiet despair. In Zerst, it was bitter cold, but at least you could warm your hands by a wood stove. In St. Petersburg, you warmed your hands over politics and felt death breathe down your spine. No one taught Catherine how to stay warm, but everyone learned how to keep a calm face. You were shivering, sweating, going blind, but still had to bow when someone walked past. In the palace, even a yawn at the wrong time could be taken as disloyalty. Catherine once placed a bowl of water in front of her to act as a DIY air cooler. Result? Heat stroke. The doctor said, "A noble body can't handle science." She once asked, "Why not install wind shafts?" The answer, "Wind is nature's, and nature doesn't belong to royalty." Catherine once dreamed of living somewhere with fans, cold towels, and iced coffee. When she woke up, there was just sweat on her pillow and a mosquito on her forehead, debating whether to bite a queen. That's how it was in the Russian palace. You didn't die of hunger, but of humidity and silent despair. Winter tested your body. Summer tortured your mind. And between those two extremes, Catherine mastered survival through indifference and observation. She didn't curse, didn't complain, just quietly wrote things down and made plans. One day, when she had power, Catherine ordered air vents and shafts to be installed. Not for comfort, but so others wouldn't suffer as she did. Because she knew an empire shouldn't stink literally or politically. In winter, you learn to endure. In summer, you learn not to scream. And in both, you learn to smile, not because you're happy, but because you're still alive. So if you've got a fan on right now, thank Catherine. And don't forget to turn it off before the next part begins. In 18th century Russia, one thing was more certain than royalty or the weather: parasites. Catherine once wrote, "I'm never alone. Something always crawls across my back at night." One time, she placed her hand on her pillow and heard a soft crunch. Not fabric, but a bedbug saying hello. If you've ever been bitten by a mosquito on a Vietnamese summer night, congrats, you've scratched the surface of life in the Russian court. German lice like hair. Russian lice prefer skin. Royal lice? They crave both status and helplessness. No spray, no anti-lice shampoo, just brushes, fireplace ash, and prayers. Maids once competed to scratch the queen's head, looking for tiny traitors. One day, Catherine heard a faint clicking inside her collar. Not a necklace, just lice partying. Peter didn't care. He wore armor, slept in it, and let lice share power by rank. One night, she felt a bug bite her shoulder. It didn't die. Came back 3 times like it was teaching patience. If you think the palace had pest control, well, they got fired for even suggesting it to Peter. Catherine once requested bed curtains. They hung them, but the bugs climbed anyway. Imagine sleeping in winter, under dirty blankets, with bedbugs roaming like they're on a picnic. One old servant said, "They bite without leaving marks. That's the sign of noble bugs." In court, there were traitors and gossips, but bugs were the most loyal. Catherine learned not to move while sleeping. Any twitch signaled party time to the insects. Once she lit a candle under her bed to smoke them out. Her room ended up smelling like burnt fur. Some nobles used dried flowers, musk, pine resin to mask the smell and the scratching sounds. When meeting foreigners, Catherine always kept distance, not for etiquette, but to avoid spreading lice. Thinking, isn't this exaggerated? Nope. Medical records of the time called lice a nationwide feature. There was even a rule: don't inspect someone's hair in front of the Tsar, because everyone knew they had lice. Each morning, her maid picked lice from Catherine's clothes like fishing from a stream. One day, she caught Peter scratching his head. He didn't stop. because to him it was an internal royal matter. You could lose your title if lice showed up at an official banquet, but you wouldn't be punished if you knew their names. Peter once named a few of his pet bedbugs. So-called noble status didn't exempt you from nature's embrace. And Catherine understood power was one thing, but sleeping without bites was the real privilege. She began seeing insects as allies. They didn't gossip, didn't plot, just drank blood. Ironically, in Russia's grandest palace, you shared a bed with bugs, and no one asked your opinion. So if you're scratching your head watching this, don't worry. We don't bite. We just tell history. Catherine had no days off. No Christmas, no birthdays. Just rituals, fake smiles, and ceremonies longer than a Russian winter. Every morning she had to smile. Not from joy, but because people checked her lips to see if they were cracked, as rumored. Every cough raised suspicion. Was she signaling rebel factions? At every meal, she didn't know if she was being poisoned. But refusing to eat would be seen as rude. And every night, when candles went out, Catherine didn't dream because dreaming was a luxury. She no longer asked, "When will I be happy?" Only, "Am I still alive?" Peter grew colder, vanishing into military drills or chatting with wooden soldier statues. Catherine wrote letters, none were answered. The court censored faster than the post office. She read philosophy under the blanket, memorizing ideas like survival codes. When she couldn't speak, she learned to listen. When she couldn't argue, she learned to write. Every time her tooth ached, she didn't dare call the doctor, for fear of being accused of abusing privilege. Every time she saw blood in the sink, she wiped it and smiled as if nothing had happened. Every time a servant was replaced, she didn't ask why. Sometimes, they didn't disappear. They were turned into warnings. Peter once said, "Russia needs discipline, not emotion." Catherine learned that in the harshest way. When her body weakened, they called her lazy. When she was healthy, they suspected conspiracy. When she stayed silent, they said she was cold. When she spoke up, they called her a troublemaker. She lived between two rumors. One claimed she was an angel, the other, a spy. But no one asked, "How do you feel?" Because feelings weren't recorded in history. You know someone's breaking when they stop writing diaries. Catherine kept writing, but never let anyone read them. Once, she stared at herself in the mirror for over an hour, trying to remember her childhood face. She couldn't, because in this palace, every day was the same, cold, long, and without reason to look forward. One day, when she couldn't cry anymore, she realized she had entered a new phase, surviving without feeling. And surviving without feeling is the highest form of endurance. She stopped calling for help. She started remembering, because memory was the only thing they couldn't steal. Every time Peter praised loyalty, she wondered, was he talking about his toy soldiers or about her? When she heard someone was punished, she wasn't shocked. She just counted one more, and she was still here. Catherine learned that hope is what gets you caught off guard. So she quietly wrapped up each dream, tucking them deep like one hides a blade in a boot. She didn't rebel. She didn't run. She just waited for the right moment. Because the longest survivors in history aren't the strongest. They're the ones who know how to wait. In the faint candlelight, Catherine blinked once. Not from tiredness, but because she had begun to see the path. And you, if you're still watching, can probably feel it too. Endurance is not weakness. It's the only way to turn yourself from a victim into the one who rewrites fate. Maybe you felt tired, stayed silent, lost hope, but Catherine, in a cold room inside a maze-like court, was still there, not to cry, but to rise on a destined day. Don't think this is a sad ending. It's just the silence before the storm. Because that endurance, that's what made Catherine, Catherine the Great. And you're still here, aren't you? How many minutes has it been? What time is it now? If you're still here, maybe you're like Catherine too. You didn't leave even though you could. And if that's true, just maybe, you're ready for what comes next. If you're rewatching this or sharing the link with someone, then let me say thank you. Catherine would continue to endure for a while longer. But after that, everything would turn. Don't look away. Because when she rises, history changes course. And you, the one still sitting here, are about to witness it. We'll continue after a bit of music. But before that, have you taken a breath? You can pause, get some water, or simply remind yourself, I'm okay, because the journey is just beginning. And you, like Catherine, have already passed the hardest part. Now let's move forward together to the next part, when one girl decides to bring down an empire. Night didn't fall with moonlight, but with knocking, room checks, body checks. Catherine lay on the bed like a statue placed there temporarily. No one asked if she wanted to sleep. The royal chamber was so cold even breath turned to frost. But she didn't shiver anymore, her body was used to it. The pillow was stuffed with fine goose feathers, yet never enough to muffle her own sighs. In the dark, bedbugs crawled across silk, their crunch like quiet mockery. Catherine didn't pray, not because she'd lost faith, but because God seemed busy elsewhere. A servant brought in tea, hands trembling, eyes downcast, as if afraid of shattering the air itself. The tea was cold, but the gaze was burning, full of things no one dared say. Catherine said thank you, just 2 words, but the most genuine she could offer all day. Every night, she looked into the mirror, not to put on makeup, but to check if she was still herself. What happened that made God decide to destroy the 2 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah with fire from heaven? This is not just an ancient story, but a lesson that still holds true for us today. Sodom and Gomorrah were once bustling, prosperous cities. The people there lived with their families, traded in the markets, and built homes just like any other community. Yet behind that lively facade was a truly dire reality. Over time, the hearts of the people grew cold. Their actions became increasingly depraved, exceeding the limits of what God could tolerate. Even so, God did not rush to punish them. He sent 2 angels to remind and warn them. But instead of repenting, the people sought to harm those messengers. And then the fateful night arrived. God decided to rain down fire and brimstone from heaven, completely consuming the 2 cities and bringing an end to a tragedy beyond saving. That terrible ending compels us to ask, what truly led them to disaster? Was it the fault of a few individuals, or did the whole community contribute to the tragedy? In today's video, we will look back at the 5 greatest sins that Sodom and Gomorrah committed, things not only of the past but still present in society today. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Well, perhaps we should start with the first sin, rampant immorality. In Sodom, sin wasn't confined to a corner. It was deeply rooted in the lives of the people, creeping into every alley and daily action. The entire city had nearly forgotten the meaning of purity and goodness. The Bible, in Genesis 19, records that God sent 2 angels to Sodom, disguised as strangers. They came to see with their own eyes, giving the city one last chance to repent. Lot, a man who kept his righteousness amidst the sin, welcomed them into his home. He showed hospitality and reverence for God in a society that had strayed from goodness. But as night fell, something terrible happened. A large crowd, both young and old, gathered outside Lot's house, surrounding it in the dark. They shouted, demanding that Lot bring the strangers out. But their intent was not to welcome, it was to commit unspeakable immoral acts. The sin here was no longer the act of a single lost individual. It was an entire community that had lost its conscience, joining together to enable evil, regardless of the consequences. In the Bible, their words carried a far darker meaning than that of a simple encounter. The people of Sodom no longer cared for kindness, hospitality, or respect for others. They were driven by the desire to dominate, to control, and to impose power on others at any cost. This was no longer merely about lust. It was a sign that the entire society had lost respect for human dignity and the sacredness of life itself. Even worse, those guests were none other than the holy messengers sent by God. Yet the people of Sodom showed no fear or respect, not even before those sent by the Lord. They defiled values that should have been preserved: hospitality, honor, and the foundations upon which their society was once built. We must ask ourselves, is today's society heading down that same path? A world where the line between right and wrong is blurred, where respect and human dignity are easily trampled. In Sodom, the gift God gave humanity, the sacred bond of love between man and woman, was perverted. The union between man and woman was no longer a pure connection but had become a tool for violence, domination, and depravity. God's original intention was for human love to reflect compassion, commitment, and purity. But in Sodom, that sacred bond had become a crude mockery, completely opposed to the Creator's will. When we reread this story, we can see shadows of Sodom in our society today, when purity is scorned, when what was once condemned is now celebrated and encouraged. We live in an age where moral boundaries are more fragile than ever. Sacred values preserved for generations are easily disregarded and mocked. Many may think the story of Sodom is just a piece of ancient history. But if today's society no longer cherishes purity and the sacred, what will the outcome be? Will God one day say, "Enough"? The destruction of Sodom came not only from their evil deeds, but from their hardened hearts, their arrogance, and their blindness to the consequences of their actions. When people can no longer see what is sacred, no longer discern what is right, that is when God intervenes. This story reminds us that disregarding the sacred always comes at a price. And so, the most important question the story leaves us: are we wise enough today to recognize and avoid repeating the sins of Sodom? Let us ask ourselves, in this life, how many times have we crossed the boundary of what is right, even just a little? And how many times have we taken the sacred lightly, until we are lost in the darkness and can no longer see the light? God's judgment upon Sodom was harsh, but it was justice. It was not a hasty decision, but the result of centuries of warnings that they stubbornly ignored. Thus, Sodom and Gomorrah became symbols of what happens when sin piles up beyond redemption. Their destruction reminds us of the devastating power of moral decay and the importance of preserving what is sacred and pure. When we look at ourselves, at the society around us, the question arises: are we gradually walking the same path Sodom once did? What values do we truly represent? Do we have the courage to stand up for what is good and sacred? The choice has always been in our hands. Like Lot, we must remain steadfast in our faith, even when the world around us is sinking into depravity. And now, we move on to the second great sin that led to the fall of Sodom: pride and arrogance. This was a silent but dangerous kind of pride, which made the people no longer see the moral decline within themselves. Many years after Sodom's destruction, a prophet named Ezekiel reminded us why the city was punished by God. In his book, Ezekiel 16 verse 49, he wrote, "The sin of your sister Sodom was pride, excessive food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy." These words show us clearly. Sodom was a wealthy city, having everything, but they lost the most important things: humility, kindness, and compassion. Pride is very dangerous. It doesn't always show itself outwardly. Often, it quietly creeps in, silently corrupting people and gradually causing society to rot from within. The people of Sodom were self-satisfied with their wealth and comforts. They believed they were superior, untouchable, needing to care for no one else. They had abundant wealth, full storehouses, and leisure time to indulge themselves. But instead of using these to help the poor or glorify God, they focused only on themselves and looked down on others. Pride blinded their conscience, making them forget the values they should have upheld: humility, kindness, and sharing with those weaker than themselves. It's easy to picture such a society. Rich, full of abundance, but then arrogant and indifferent, no longer thinking of their responsibility to the community and to God. Today, let us ask, how many times have we seen this silent pride take root in our own society? When life is smooth, when blessings surround us, it's easy for people to forget the one who gave them those blessings. In times of plenty, we easily think that all we have is by our own efforts, that we need no one, not even God. But the Bible constantly warns of the danger of such thinking. Remember ancient Babylon. Because of pride, they thought they were everything, that no one could touch them. Isaiah 47 verse 8 says, "You say, 'I am, and there is no one besides me. I shall not sit as a widow or know the loss of children.' Yet in a single night, that mighty Babylon fell completely, just as God had said. The same happened to Egypt, a land once proud of its strength and wealth, but brought low by the hand of God. Even the great king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had to endure years of madness, until at last he humbly acknowledged God's absolute power. Pride creeps in so cleverly. It inflates the human ego, making us believe we can be self-sufficient, decide everything without God. The false sense of being invincible is the most dangerous thing, because it draws people away from God and into destruction without them realizing it. Looking at history, looking at the world today, I feel all the more that humility before God, gratitude for what we have, is truly the foundation that keeps both individuals and communities strong. As the people of Sodom grew more and more arrogant, they began to believe they could not be judged, that they stood above any punishment from God. The saddest thing about pride is that it blinds people to the emptiness in their own souls. The people of Sodom thought they had everything: wealth, status, worldly pleasures. But in truth, they were utterly bankrupt in spirit. They no longer saw their deepest need, to need God, to need His guidance and mercy. When we put all our trust in temporary wealth and comforts, we risk becoming like Sodom, blinded by pride, self-satisfied, and gradually losing our way. Let us ask ourselves, how much have we let pride shape our lives? Do we still trust in God's care, or rely only on our abilities and possessions? The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a powerful reminder. Pride, whether silent or blatant, leads to ruin. The people of Sodom thought they could not be touched. But God's judgment came swiftly, and their fate is a costly lesson for all generations. I believe that only by being awake, humble, and returning to God can we avoid the mistakes that Sodom made. This is not just a story of the past. It still shines a light on our present reality. Pride always leads to destruction, and God will humble those who refuse to acknowledge their dependence on His power. Are we being vigilant about this? Are we humble enough to admit that without God, we are nothing? Or are we, like Sodom, drawing near to spiritual emptiness while thinking we are full? And now we come to the third great sin of Sodom, the lack of hospitality. This was one of the reasons the city was destroyed by God. In ancient society, hospitality was not just courtesy or a kind gesture. It was a sacred duty, deeply embedded in the foundation of culture and way of life. When a stranger entered the town, people had the responsibility to provide food, water, shelter, and protection. This was not just an obligation, but a way to show compassion and care for the vulnerable. Hospitality was a mirror reflecting the compassion of a community. It showed that they respected the values God wanted humanity to uphold: love and protection for one another. But sadly, Sodom had completely lost this, and that was part of the reason the city suffered such a severe fate. In the Bible, welcoming a stranger was not just politeness. It was an act of respect, because sometimes the stranger was a guest sent by God. The presence of the divine could appear in the form of a traveler. But in Sodom, the opposite happened. When two angels disguised as humans entered the city, they were not welcomed but became targets of violence. The people of Sodom, from young to old, gathered outside Lot's house. Instead of protecting the guests, they pressured him to hand them over. Their intention came not from hospitality. They sought to harm, abuse, and humiliate the innocent guests. A meeting that should have been peaceful turned into a night of horror. They not only failed in their sacred duty, but committed a profound sin, betraying the values God taught about love and protection for the vulnerable. Hospitality reflected God's own kindness. He is the one who always opens His arms to welcome and protect those in need. In the Bible, as written in Hebrews 13 verse 2, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." Sodom rejected this sacred duty and bore the consequences. This story reminds us of the lasting value of hospitality and the consequences of turning away from what God wants humanity to uphold. Welcoming strangers is not just courtesy but a sacred obligation. It is a way to respect others as if they are guests sent by God. Often, the presence of the divine appears in the form of a stranger. In Sodom, everything went in the opposite direction. When two angels disguised as strangers entered the city, the people of Sodom did not welcome them. Sodom's rejection of hospitality became proof of their deep fall, and part of the reason for the destruction they suffered. When the people treated the guests violently, it was not just an insult to moral and cultural standards, but a direct betrayal of what God taught about how people should treat one another. This was not merely a lack of courtesy. It was a rejection of the loving and caring nature that God wants humanity to reflect. God values hospitality because it clearly reflects His love and care for everyone. A nation that fails this test loses the ability to reflect God's image in the world. In modern society, we sometimes forget the true value of hospitality. Many close their hearts to strangers, hesitant to reach out and help. Yet the way we treat others, especially the vulnerable or strangers, is the measure of our heart and our faith. In a society filled with division, suspicion, and judgment, opening our hearts in hospitality is not just kindness, but a reflection of God's heart. The people of Sodom failed completely in this test. They not only refused to welcome, but attacked and humiliated those who should have been protected. And that choice sealed their fate: destruction. In truth, the rejection of hospitality by the people of Sodom was not just an accidental act. It was a reflection of souls that had grown cold, losing care and compassion. Each time we close our hearts and fail to welcome a stranger, we may not realize it, but we are moving away from God's teaching, to love others as He loves us. So what about us today? When we face strangers, the marginalized, or those different from us, what attitude will we choose? Will we be ready to smile at them, extend a helping hand, or will we shut the door, thinking only of our own comfort and safety, forgetting the suffering of others? The lesson from Sodom poses a great question. How do we respond to those in need of shelter and love? The reality today is that many still live in hardship and loneliness. The ancient story urges us not only to think, but to act with love and kindness. Are we opening our hearts to others, or are we gradually closing ourselves off from the world? Does our heart still reflect God's kindness, or has indifference, like in Sodom, taken over? The fourth great sin that led to the fall of Sodom was the oppression of the poor and ignoring the needy. This was not just a momentary act of indifference, but an attitude deeply ingrained in their society. The prophet Ezekiel emphasized this failure. He said, "This was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy." Ezekiel 16 verse 49. These words speak not only of Sodom's material abundance, but accuse them of turning a blind eye to those truly in need of compassion. Throughout the Bible, God reminds us that He loves the poor, the oppressed, and the forgotten. He instructed His people, share with the hungry, protect the widow, and care for the orphan. Isaiah 1 verse 17. These are not fleeting commands or meant for a specific time. They are the basic foundation of the kingdom of God, the way He wants humanity to reflect His loving heart in this life. God's justice and mercy always go hand in hand. He desires that we care for and uplift the weak, those who cannot care for themselves. But in Sodom, this was forgotten. The people lived in wealth with abundant food and possessions, more than enough to share. Yet they chose to close their hearts, refusing to help those in need. It was not accidental. They deliberately chose comfort while ignoring the suffering around them. That indifference was not a small mistake, but a cold, selfish choice. That heartlessness made God angry, because when we turn our backs on the poor and weak, we also turn our backs on God, who always sides with the abandoned and oppressed. This is not just a story of a few individuals' faults. It is the collapse of an entire society. God did not just warn individuals but called the whole community to account for living unjustly, for neglecting mercy, and letting the poor suffer while they enjoyed wealth. Throughout history, we see this clearly in Israel and many other nations. Whenever they oppressed the poor or turned from justice, God sent prophets to warn them. Ezekiel 22 verse 29 says, God strongly condemned the leaders of Israel because they exploited and oppressed the poor, those who could not defend themselves. Similar judgments fell on nations like Edom, Tyre, and many others for not heeding the cries of the weak. Today, we also witness a world full of poverty, deprivation, and injustice. How many people need shelter, a meal, medical care, And how often have we, who are able, chosen silence, ignoring their suffering? Every time we are indifferent and fail to act, we repeat Sodom's mistake. We become complicit in lovelessness and lack of compassion. Let's reflect. Does the way we live reflect God's heart of justice and mercy? The people of Sodom had surplus wealth and the means to help, but they chose to turn away from those who needed saving. They lived in wealth and abundance while others suffered and lacked. It's sad to realize that today, we might be following that same path. How often do we see injustice yet choose silence? How often do we become part of a system that maintains injustice? God still calls us. Live with a nobler heart, care for the poor and oppressed. Be the embodiment of mercy and justice in this world. Reading this, ask yourself, what have you done to support those in trouble? Does your way of life reflect God's righteousness? Are you ready to open your heart to the weak, or has fear or selfishness closed it? The story of Sodom is not just a tragedy of the distant past. It still echoes as a wake-up call for all of us today. The fifth and final sin that sealed Sodom and Gomorrah's fate was rebellion against God and refusal to repent. This was not simply about making a few mistakes in life. It was a public challenge to the Creator. The people of Sodom did not sin out of weakness or ignorance. They deliberately chose wrong, took pride in their sinful acts, and had no intention of changing. There was no remorse in their hearts. They stubbornly refused every call to return to righteousness. Perhaps this hardness of heart and defiant attitude hurt God most. God, rich in mercy, patiently gave them time and warned them many times. He even listened to Abraham's plea, agreeing to spare the city if just 10 righteous people could be found. But sadly, not even a small group meeting that standard could be found. The city was so steeped in sin that not a few good people remained. This was not just the failure of individuals but the complete moral collapse of an entire society. A community had strayed so far from righteousness that destruction became inevitable. This story forces us to reflect. Is integrity still upheld in our society today? Are we becoming like Sodom, as hearts grow harder against God's call? Even Lot, who lived among the people of Sodom, tried his best to warn his sons-in-law. He pleaded with them to leave the city before disaster struck. But instead of listening, Lot's sons-in-law mocked him. They thought the warning was ridiculous, not worth paying attention to. In their eyes, nothing serious was about to happen. They ignored their final chance to change, the chance to escape a tragic fate. Today, we often witness people dismissing warnings, mocking the idea of judgment, and thinking that life will remain peaceful as it is, despite all signs calling for awakening. The problem wasn't just individual. It was an entire community that hardened its heart against God's call for repentance. Even when God's angels appeared before them, they still refused to step back or change. They continued to plunge into sin, lost in darkness, unable or unwilling to see the light of truth right before them. This is what broke God's heart. For God, full of patience and mercy, had given them so many chances to turn back. But when they rejected everything, refusing to change despite being warned time and again, judgment became inevitable. Then fire and brimstone rained down from heaven, consuming everything. The cities that once brimmed with life, once echoed with children's laughter, the warmth of homes, the voices of a thriving community, were now nothing but smoking ashes. Today, does God still give us such opportunities? Every day we wake up is a new opportunity to return to Him, to leave wrong paths behind and turn our hearts toward the light. Yet how many times have we wasted those opportunities? How often have we ignored the warning signs, telling ourselves we have plenty of time, that consequences are far off, or that we will not have to bear them? The story of Sodom and Gomorrah reminds us that a time will come when warnings stop, when the door of mercy closes and judgment arrives. When Lot and his family fled the city, the angel gave them clear instructions. Do not look back. Run to save your lives. That message was simple but powerful. Escape destruction. Do not cling to a sinful past. But as the family fled, something heartbreaking happened. Lot's wife, though warned, turned back to look at the city. In her heart, she still longed for the old life, still clung to the sinful past. And in that moment, she became a pillar of salt. Her fate is a bitter reminder to us all. Even when God grants us a chance at deliverance, if we keep longing for what we should leave behind, consequences will follow. When Lot's wife looked back, she was longing for the very things that had led the city to ruin. Her story reminds us, repentance is not just about outward actions but about freeing the heart from attachment to sin. In daily life, how often do we feel torn between the old life God calls us to leave and the better life He offers? How often do we still cling to the past even knowing God wants us to move forward? The image of Lot's wife is a wake-up call. Her failure was not that she couldn't run, but that she couldn't let go of what she should have left behind. God had opened a new path for her, but she could not fully step into it. This is the greatest tragedy of rebellion. The final act of the people of Sodom, refusing to repent despite clear warnings, is what led to their destruction. God's patience finally ended, and then judgment was carried out. Fire and brimstone from heaven completely destroyed the once mighty cities. But the greatest tragedy was not the external destruction, but the death within the souls of those who refused to hear God's call. The question for us today remains, will we listen to God's warning? Will we dare to abandon the rebellion in our hearts? Or will we, like Sodom, ignore every warning until it's too late? We still witness today a society breaking moral boundaries, celebrating what goes against God's plan for humanity. There remains the pride that makes people deceive themselves into thinking they don't need God, that they can steer their lives without His guidance. We still easily close our hearts, indifferent to strangers, refusing to open our doors and share kindness, forgetting that hospitality reflects God's love. The poor, the vulnerable, and those in need are still around us every day. Yet many times we turn a blind eye, forgetting that God deeply cares for these people. And the saddest part is that many still live in rebellion, turning their backs on God's loving call to repentance. But remember, God does not change. He is still loving, and still desires to save those willing to return to Him. And though God's justice will surely come, His mercy remains wide open for those who truly return to Him. Just as He once sent angels to warn the people of Sodom, today He continues to remind us, giving us opportunities to leave the wrong path. Before the fire fell to consume Sodom, God gave them time, opened opportunities, but they rejected them all. And the lesson here is clear. God is full of patience, but that patience does not last forever. One day, His justice will be done, but if we repent, His mercy is ready to receive us. After that terrible destruction, Lot and his daughters found refuge in a small town called Zoar. By God's mercy, Zoar was spared from judgment, and it became their temporary shelter. Genesis 19 verse 22. But that peace did not last long. Lot became afraid, fearing that Zoar might also suffer the same fate as Sodom. So he took his family up into the mountains and lived in a cave to avoid danger. Genesis 19 verse 30. What seemed like the beginning of peace and recovery actually opened a new tragedy. In loneliness and fear, Lot's daughters worried that their family line would come to an end forever. In their desperation, they made a plan. They got their father drunk and lay with him to preserve their lineage. A plan born of fear that led to a sorrowful chapter in Lot's family story. This is not just a story of escape and survival. It is a serious reminder of what can happen when people do not fully abandon what is tied to sin, even after being saved. From that tragic act, 2 children were born, Moab and Ben-Ammi. These children later became the ancestors of the Moabites and Ammonites, nations that became lifelong enemies of Israel. Genesis 19 verses 36 to 38. This story speaks not only of moral failure but clearly reflects the consequences of sin. Consequences that can cling to people even after they have been delivered. Though Lot and his daughters were spared from the terrifying destruction of Sodom, the emotional wounds, fears, and moral failures continued to weigh heavily on them. This is a warning that even after God reaches out in salvation, we can still stumble if we continue to cling to a sinful past or let fear lead us instead of faith. Sadly, the Bible does not clearly record Lot's feelings or reaction after that painful event. We can only imagine that he carried deep sorrow, perhaps regret and disappointment over himself and what had happened. Though Lot was saved from Sodom's destruction by God, it is clear he did not completely change. The psychological scars and consequences of his family's sin continued to haunt and affect his life. This story reminds us of an important truth. Being saved from destruction is not enough to completely erase the consequences of sin. God's forgiveness is the beginning, but true healing and transformation must come from a change of heart. The salvation God offers is not just to spare us from punishment. It is an invitation to live a new life, a life that leaves behind sinful pasts, releases fear, and lets go of old habits to truly walk in faith. For if our hearts still carry unhealed wounds, we can still fall, still be pulled back by the past. Lot's fear and his daughter's moral fall show the inner battles many of us face even after God rescues us from sin. God can open the way for us to escape danger, but we must choose to leave behind the sinful past so that the renewal he wants to bring can take root in our hearts. Have we opened our hearts to receive his work of renewal? God's grace is always ready, but we must truly receive it and allow him to complete his work in our lives. This story is not meant to frighten anyone, but to awaken us. It invites us to reflect on our lives, our society, and our hearts. I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings after revisiting this story together. Share them because when we reflect together, we can learn from the past and make better choices for the future. If today's message has touched your heart, don't forget to share this video so others can also be reminded, and subscribe to the channel to join me on this journey of exploring the Bible and life-changing lessons. Don't let this moment pass by without meaning. Seize this opportunity to reflect, to return, and to seek God's mercy while the door of grace is still open. God calls us to live by his truth, to let his mercy shape and transform us into the people he desires us to be. Let us learn from the lesson of the past. Do not let it repeat in our lives. Decide today that we will return to God, live meaningfully, and walk firmly on the path he has set for us. Time is precious. Use it wisely so that when we look back, we have no regrets, but see that we have lived according to what God desires. December 25th each year, Christmas, is also the day we commemorate the birth of Jesus Christ. However, none of the Gospels actually mention this specific date. So why do we celebrate on this day? And more importantly, when was Jesus really born? To find the answer, let's take a look at the carefully recorded details in the Holy Scriptures. There are 7 key facts to consider, and when pieced together, they provide a clearer picture of Jesus' birth. Today, I invite you to open this sacred book with me, to study and uncover truths preserved for over 2,000 years. Before we begin, leave your guess in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to not miss future videos. The first clue we find is in the Gospel of Luke, referring to the famous census at that time. During the reign of Caesar Augustus, he ordered a massive empire-wide census. This is considered the first census conducted while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Everyone had to return to their hometown to register and declare their information by imperial order. The Romans were known for precision and control. They used censuses like this to govern, collect taxes, and ensure no one escaped their system. These censuses weren't just paperwork. They were tools to display the empire's power, forcing even the lowest to submit. But the amazing thing is, while Augustus believed he was in control, it was God who was using these events to fulfill his divine plan. This census inadvertently caused thousands to travel, including a small family carrying the Savior of the world. Joseph, of the lineage of David, had to return to Bethlehem with Mary, who was pregnant with Jesus, just as the old prophecy had written. The journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem was about 80 miles, a tough trip even for the healthy. For Mary, heavily pregnant, the journey was especially exhausting and difficult. What they may have seen as a burden was actually a part of God's larger plan. Over 700 years earlier, the prophet Micah declared, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come a ruler for Israel." Through the Roman emperor's decree, this prophecy was fulfilled when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Additionally, there's another important detail many overlook: the weather conditions in Judea at that time. Winter in that region is cold and damp, not suitable for long travel or conducting a census. This suggests that Jesus may not have been born in the middle of winter, as commonly believed. Logically, this census likely took place in spring or fall, when the weather was milder and travel was easier. Moreover, these times coincided with major gatherings in the Jewish calendar, like harvest season or large festivals. These were occasions when people were already used to traveling and gathering in large numbers. Remarkably, the very tool of imperial control became the means by which God carried out his plan. Caesar Augustus, intending to manage his vast empire, unwittingly set the stage for the most significant event in human history, the birth of the Messiah. This census was not a coincidence, but God's way of ensuring his son was born in the right place, at the right time as foretold. Joseph and Mary had no idea that every step toward Bethlehem was fulfilling ancient prophecy. Caesar Augustus, too, was unaware that his decree was part of a divine, preordained plan. Through this, we clearly see how God arranges historical events, even the most mundane, to fulfill his purposes. Jesus wasn't born in a place chosen by man, but in one divinely appointed from the beginning. While the Roman Empire controlled every aspect of life, God's supreme power quietly moved his plan forward. This census reminds us that even when man thinks he is in charge, a divine plan is unfolding in perfect detail. From this census, we understand that Jesus was likely not born in winter, a time not ideal for travel or administrative tasks. A more fitting time would be spring or fall, when weather conditions allowed for easier movement and gatherings. Now, let's move on to the second clue, which involves the father of John the Baptist. This clue begins with an important detail. Zechariah, John's father, was a priest in the division of Abijah. One day, while he was burning incense in the temple, an angel appeared to him with news. His wife Elizabeth, though old and barren, would bear a child. That child would be John the Baptist, the one who would go before and prepare the way for the Messiah. This is where it gets interesting, because the timing of this event gives us a surprising clue to estimate the birth of Jesus. Zechariah's temple service is one of the most important clues to determining when Jesus was born. According to the Gospel of Luke, during the reign of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, from the division of Abijah. When it was the turn of the Abijah division to serve in the temple, Zechariah was ministering before the Lord, as was customary. The priests of Israel were divided into 24 divisions, each serving 1 week twice a year, as recorded in 1 Chronicles 24. Zechariah's division was the 8th, which typically served around May or June. During this time of service, the angel Gabriel appeared to Zechariah and told him that his wife Elizabeth would conceive. Later, Luke chapter 1 says that 6 months after Elizabeth conceived, the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and told her she would be the mother of Jesus. This suggests that Mary conceived around November or December. Adding 9 months of pregnancy, Jesus was likely born around September or October. Interestingly, this time frame coincides with the Feast of Tabernacles, one of the most significant Jewish festivals. The Feast of Tabernacles was held to commemorate God's presence among the Israelites during their wilderness journey. It's possible that Jesus, called Emmanuel, meaning God with us, was born during this very festival. This is a meaningful thought because it ties Jesus' birth to the Jewish calendar and to deep theological symbolism, as if every detail had been part of God's meticulous plan from the beginning. The story of Zechariah may seem isolated at first, but it's actually a crucial part of the grand picture God was painting. Every word in the Bible has meaning and is placed precisely. Nothing is random. This small detail further illustrates God's perfect plan, leaving no room for error. And it gives us yet another clue linking Jesus' birth to an important Jewish festival. The third clue relates to the Feast of Tabernacles and the surprising connection between Jesus' birth and Jewish festivals. The Israelites lived by a calendar full of holidays, not just to remember their history, but to reflect on greater truths, like the arrival of the Messiah. Each of these festivals carried deep spiritual meaning, and some remarkably align with possible dates for Jesus' birth. As we've seen, Jesus may have been born during the Feast of Tabernacles, one of the holiest events in the Jewish calendar. The Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, commemorates the time when God dwelled among the Israelites in tents during their journey out of Egypt. This festival takes place in autumn, around September or October, as a time of joy, gratitude, and reflection on God's presence. There is another Bible verse that supports this theory. In the first chapter of the Gospel of John, we read, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." What's fascinating is that in the original Greek, the word dwelt can also be translated as tabernacled. So what better time for God to truly dwell among His people than during the Feast of Tabernacles? Moreover, Jewish festivals are not only commemorations of the past, but also prophetic symbols of future events. For example, Passover is associated with the death of Jesus, who is called the Lamb of God. Pentecost coincided with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. If these major events aligned with Jewish festivals, it's logical to think that Jesus' birth might align with a significant feast as well. Another festival possibly related to Jesus' birth is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, also held in the fall. It marks a new beginning and invites people to reflect on God's kingship. The sound of the shofar during this time calls for repentance and proclaims God's sovereignty, a fitting setting for the birth of the King of Kings. When Jesus came into the world, He ushered in a new era, a new covenant and a new hope for all humanity. Everything in God's plan was perfectly arranged, like a symphony where every note is in its rightful place. The idea that Jesus' birth coincided with a Jewish festival shows this was no random event. This event is closely tied to the historical tradition and spiritual expectations of the people of Israel. However, we need to consider two other clues in the Bible related to the time after Mary gave birth to Jesus. The fourth clue involves the shepherds. In the Gospel of Luke, there is an important detail about the night Jesus was born that we may have heard but not deeply thought about. The scripture says, "There were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified." This story offers a key clue to help us better understand the season in which Jesus was born. It was nighttime, and the shepherds were out in the fields watching their flocks under the starry skies of Judea. December in this region is typically cold, with damp nights and extended rain. This is the time when shepherds usually look for shelter for their flocks, avoiding open fields. Therefore, the idea of shepherds staying outside in winter to watch over their flocks doesn't align with local customs or weather conditions. This detail pushes us to consider another season of the year, possibly spring, summer, or fall. Spring is lambing season, the weather is mild, and nights are cool but not too harsh. Summer nights are warm, and shepherds often lead their flocks out to enjoy the cooler air after hot days. In fall, during harvest time, shepherds still keep their flocks out in the fields thanks to the still moderate weather. In winter, however, nighttime grazing is uncommon and quite challenging. What's fascinating is that such a small story detail can reveal an important truth about the timing of Jesus' birth. If the shepherds were out in the fields watching their flocks, it strongly suggests Jesus was unlikely born in December. But there is another clue that appears on the night Jesus was born: the Star of Bethlehem. The Star of Bethlehem is one of the most mysterious and captivating elements of the Nativity story. In Matthew chapter 2, we read that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose." But what exactly was this star? Was it a natural phenomenon, a divine sign, or perhaps both? Either way, the star marked the exact time when the heavens announced that something extraordinary had taken place on earth. To shed light on this mystery, many have tried to identify astronomical events that may have occurred at that time. One of the most common theories about the Star of Bethlehem is that it was a planetary conjunction. This phenomenon happens when two planets, such as Jupiter and Saturn, align in the sky to form a bright point of light. According to astronomical calculations, such a conjunction occurred around 7 BC, approximately when Jesus is believed to have been born. Another theory suggests the star could have been a nova or supernova, an exploding star that shines brightly for weeks or months, enough to draw attention from anyone watching the sky. However, to this day, there are no historical records confirming such an astronomical event at that time. Some believe the star may have been a comet, a celestial body moving through the sky, which seemed to lead the wise men on their journey. However, at that time, comets were usually seen as bad omens, not symbols of hope, so it's unlikely that the Star of Bethlehem was a comet. What makes the story even more fascinating is that the star didn't just appear for observation. It had a purpose: to guide the wise men. The wise men didn't just see the star. They followed it until they arrived at the exact place where Jesus was born. This shows that the Star of Bethlehem wasn't just a natural phenomenon, but a special sign used by God to announce the birth of his son. Most importantly, the star wasn't merely a sign in the sky. It was a message to all humanity. The Messiah has arrived. Yet, the religious leaders in Jerusalem ignored the prophetic scriptures about the Messiah. While this very sign caught King Herod's attention, when the wise men asked Herod about the child, they unintentionally alerted him to the existence of the Savior. From that moment, Herod issued one of his most brutal decrees, and this decree gives us another clue about Jesus' birth. The sixth clue involves King Herod and the massacre of the innocents, one of the cruelest events associated with Jesus' birth. According to the book of Matthew, the Magi followed the star to Jerusalem, assuming the newborn king would be in Herod's palace. They asked Herod, "Where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Herod told them, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After leaving Jerusalem, the wise men were warned in a dream not to return to Herod. When Herod realized he had been deceived by the wise men, he was furious and ordered the slaughter of all male children aged 2 and under in Bethlehem. Though cruel and inhumane, Herod's decree gives us a significant clue about the timing of Jesus' birth. From this detail, we can estimate a clearer time frame for Jesus' birth. We know that Herod died in 4 BC, meaning the massacre must have occurred shortly before that. If Jesus was under 2 years old at the time, he was likely born between 6 and 4 BC. The historical context supports this. Herod was notorious for his paranoia and brutality, even killing his own family members to secure his throne. When he heard of a new king's birth, his reaction was exactly as expected: eliminate any threat, no matter how innocent. But what Herod didn't know was that this king had not come to take an earthly throne, but to establish a heavenly kingdom no man could stop. Herod's plan failed because Joseph was warned by an angel in a dream and fled with Mary and Jesus to Egypt. This escape not only saved the Savior, but also fulfilled another prophecy: "Out of Egypt I called my son." The scripture says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." Even the tears of the mothers in Bethlehem had been foretold by the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah wrote, "A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more." Astonishingly, even in the darkness of the massacre, God's plan was perfectly fulfilled. Nothing could stop it. The massacre of the innocents highlights the stark contrast between human cruelty and God's perfect plan. Herod tried to use death to stop life, not knowing the child he feared most would one day conquer death itself. And the final clue to Jesus' birth is revealed through the moment he began his public ministry. According to Luke chapter 3, Jesus was about 30 years old when he began preaching. This is a key detail, not just a biographical note. In fact, this detail helps us pinpoint his birth by counting backward from the start of his ministry. Jesus began his ministry in a specific historical context, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius Caesar. Luke notes that this happened in the 15th year of Tiberius' reign, which historians place around AD 29 or 30. If Jesus was about 30 years old at that time, this places his birth somewhere between 6 and 4 BC. This time frame aligns with the period when Herod the Great was still alive, confirming the Bible's account that Jesus was born during Herod's reign. The connection between these historical and biblical details gives us a strong clue about when the Savior entered the world. But why did Jesus begin his ministry at around age 30? That number is not random. In Jewish tradition, 30 was a significant age, the minimum age for a priest to begin service in the temple, according to Numbers chapter 4. It was also the age when a man was considered fully mature and capable of taking on public and spiritual responsibility. Jesus, though not from the tribe of Levi, presented himself as the eternal high priest, beginning a ministry that would not only change history but open the way of salvation for all humanity. The start of his ministry marked a turning point and invites us to reflect on the 30 silent years he spent in Nazareth. What happened during those 30 years, the years of preparation for his great mission? While the Bible is mostly silent about Jesus' first 30 years, we can imagine them as years of preparation, obedience, and growth. Those years were not wasted. They were the perfect time for Jesus to be fully ready to begin his mission at the appointed moment. Now, let us review the 7 clues that help determine the birth of Jesus. Clue number 1. The conception of John the Baptist occurred around June 6 BC, suggesting Jesus was conceived about 6 months later, around December. This would place Jesus' birth around September or October 5 BC, assuming a full 9-month pregnancy. Clue number 2. The theory that the Star of Bethlehem was a planetary conjunction or astronomical event fits with a date around 6 or 5 BC. Clue number 3. The massacre of infants occurred before Herod's death in 4 BC, confirming that Jesus was born before then. Clue number 4. Jesus began his ministry around AD 28 at about 30 years old, supporting a birth date between 6 and 4 BC. Clue number 5. The shepherds being out in the fields rules out December, since shepherds didn't keep flocks outside during the winter. Clue number 6. The census by Caesar Augustus would have likely taken place in autumn, a more practical season for travel. Clue number 7. The Gospel of John mentions, "The Word dwelt among us," suggesting a connection to the Feast of Tabernacles in September or October. All this evidence points to Jesus being born in September or October of a year before the Common Era, aligning perfectly with historical events and biblical prophecies. The question then arises, why doesn't our calendar year align with the actual year of Jesus' birth? There's a reason why the year 0 doesn't match the true time frame of Jesus' birth, between 6 and 4 BC. The discrepancy stems from a human error made centuries after Jesus' time, when our current calendar system was created. It began in the 6th century, when a monk named Dionysius Exiguus attempted to determine a starting point for history, the year of Christ's birth. Dionysius had noble intentions. He wanted to divide history into 2 parts, before Christ and after Christ. He based his calculations on historical documents and the Gospels, but he didn't have the accurate information we have today. As a result, Dionysius made serious mistakes. He didn't know that Herod the Great, who was still alive at Jesus' birth according to the Gospels, had died in 4 BC. This means that Jesus must have been born before that year. Additionally, the calendar system Dionysius created had no year 0. It jumped from 1 BC to AD 1, further skewing the chronology. Ironically, although Dionysius miscalculated, his system was quickly adopted and became the foundation of the calendar we still use today. Changing this system now is nearly impossible, since millions of historical records, events, and celebrations are based on it. Thus, the world continues to use this calendar system, even though it doesn't reflect the actual year Jesus was born. Still, there is beauty in this. It reminds us that what matters isn't the exact number, but the sacred meaning of the event we celebrate, the arrival of the Messiah. It's fascinating to think that although Dionysius got the year wrong, his effort helped shape history. History still revolves around the most important event, the birth of Jesus. His intent was to mark the most significant moment in human history, the birth of the Savior. Even if the date is off, his system carries timeless influence. So why do many people believe Jesus was born on December 25th? In fact, this belief doesn't come from the Bible but from traditions and decisions made centuries after his birth. In the first 3 centuries of Christianity, there was no agreement on the exact date of Jesus' birth. In fact, early Christians didn't celebrate his birth at all. They focused on his death and resurrection. So why did December 25th become widely accepted? One popular theory connects it to the pagan winter solstice festival held between December 21st to 25th in the Roman Empire. This festival, called Sol Invictus, celebrated the rebirth of the sun after the year's shortest days, symbolizing the victory of light over darkness. That message aligns closely with the message of Christianity. Jesus is the light of the world. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine in the 4th century, church leaders chose December 25th to replace the pagan festival with a celebration of Jesus' birth. This strategy made it easier for people to embrace Christianity, keeping some familiar customs while shifting the focus to the Savior. Another theory suggests December 25th was based on the idea that Jesus was conceived on March 25th, a date also associated with his crucifixion, and 9 months later is December. However, this calculation isn't based on historical or biblical evidence, but rather on an effort to spiritually connect key moments in Jesus' life with the calendar year. December 25th is not the actual birthday of Jesus, and that's okay. Even the apostles closest to him never celebrated his birthday. What matters is not the exact date, but the meaning we celebrate. Christmas is not just about Jesus' birth. It's about the Incarnation, the greatest miracle humanity has ever known. The Incarnation is when God became man, giving us the gift of salvation, breaking the power of sin, and opening the gates of heaven. I rarely say this, but today I invite you to watch the linked video, The True Meaning of Christmas. It's a message worth understanding and sharing with your family and loved ones. Embrace this message, become a light, and share it with those around you, today and always. Amen. Hello, how are you today? This is the channel for souls who love mythology, stories from the past, and sometimes even mysteries. And today, I'll take you into Greek mythology. But let me warn you, not every god is a handsome hero with muscles riding a white horse, haha. Some of them aren't much different from us. Tonight, we'll talk about someone no one wants to talk about. Irene, a name even the gods pretend they've never heard. And if you've never heard of him, don't worry. They did that on purpose. Because Irene is the forgotten son of Hisus, the crippled blacksmith god who was thrown out of Olympus like a defective tool. Hisus was born from fire, molten iron, and broken nails, not from sunsets or golden light. And Irene? He was the result of a night when Hisus couldn't control his hammer or his heart. More precisely, he couldn't control his lust for a mortal woman. No one foresaw Irene's arrival. No prophecy, no strange star, just a cry, drowned out by hammer strikes. He wasn't laid in a golden cradle. It was a basket of cold coal rags next to greasy cloths. While other gods had prime time on Mythology TV, Irene didn't even have a student ID photo. He grew up down below, where there was no light, no teacher, and barely anyone who cared. And now, this is where we begin his story. But wait, turn off the lights first. Seriously, tonight will be long. Turn on a fan, or play some fake rain if you like, and find the warmest spot in bed. Don't expect miracles, but don't be surprised if your heart skips a few beats in the middle of this story. If the storytelling style suits your taste, leave a like. And if you really enjoy it, go ahead and subscribe, no pressure. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is now. Now then, let's begin the story the gods didn't want you to hear. Irene, the abandoned child. Alright, so we've met Irene, our main character, the child hidden like a teenage diary secret of the gods. Now it's time to talk about his father, Hisus. And wow, what a mess this one is. Hisus is the god of forges, leads wars, and apparently also invented irresponsibility. His name sounds like someone mashed up Hercules and Hephaestus, then hit shuffle on the beta version of Mythology. He once loved a mortal, Callista, the best blacksmith in Miami Bay. She even taught a few gods how to forge armor that doesn't explode when touched by fire. They met in the forge. Sparks flew not just from iron but from their eyes. One night, after a few glasses of black god wine, they, did what grown-ups do. Then Hisus vanished. No address, no contact. If there were Facebook or Twitter, he'd probably have blocked her. He returned to Olympus like he'd never loved anyone. Because responsibility is something gods tend to forget at home. Callista was different. She couldn't forget. Especially after the morning sickness the next day hit her hard. While the gods held conferences in the clouds, She raised a child on burnt bread and the sound of hammering through the night. Irene grew up in the forge, not because he liked fire, but because his mother had no other choice. And Hisus? What did he do? He made a sword that could split a chariot, then posted it on the Olympus wall with the caption, "Work hard, burn harder." No one asked, "Hey, what about the kid down on Earth?" And that's exactly the problem. Irene had no throne, no prophecy, no magical mentor to teach him runes. He had soot. He had coughing fits from smoke. And a question that followed him through childhood. "Mom, who am I?" And Callista, a woman who should have been immortalized in myth, could only sigh, "You're the son of the god who's very good at disappearing, especially from responsibility." Irene had no magic, but he had memory, and memory sticks like the fat under armor. He remembered every time he was forgotten, every condescending look from scrap metal dealers. He remembered the mocking laughs whenever someone said, "Child of a god," without saying his name. He remembered what it felt like to belong nowhere, not quite mortal, not quite divine. And maybe that's what forged the Irene we see today. Not a savior, not a demigod, just a person, born among iron, forged by a silent father and a mother's tears. If you're waiting for a miracle, sorry. Irene had nothing but a rusty hammer. And one day he picked it up not to build but to break. And that's when this story began to change. But hey, if you think this is the part where Hisus shows up to claim his son, sorry, wrong mythos. He's busy, probably designing new armor for the next divine war. Started because someone used the wrong spoon at dinner. And Irene? He grew up in the shadow of a father who never asked, "Is he okay?" Callista stayed the same, forging weapons for lords and willpower for her son. That boy had no divine glow, but every hammer strike whispered, "Stand on your own." No prophecy, no gifts from titans. No one taught him to wield lightning. Just hammers, metal dust, and a dream that someday he'd climb Olympus. Not to reunite with family, but to, well, you guess. Irene didn't know what he'd become. He only knew he didn't want to be like his father. No abandonment, no silence, no pretending not to hear the cries from below. And you know what? It was from that place, where a forgotten child learned to hate silence, that the real story began. Some children are born amid thunder and celestial trumpets. Irene was not one of them. He was born to the groans of red-hot iron and the stench of burnt ashes. No prophetic midwives, no stars streaking across the sky. Only Callista, trembling on cold ground, her hands calloused from forging steel, now shaking from divine blood. Someone once said, "Heroes are born in pain." Yeah. They probably never saw a mortal woman gritting her teeth through childbirth behind a forge. No welcome from Olympus. No divine gift wrapped in fate. Just a newborn barely crying because ash got into his lungs before he could take his first breath. Callista held him close, not in relief, but to make sure he was still alive. No one but her knew Irene was a god's child. And if you're wondering why she never told anyone, then you've clearly never been a single mother in a world that only respects power. Callista didn't need congratulations. She needed coal that burned evenly, a steady hammer hand, and enough milk for a child who'd grow up asking questions no one would answer. As for Irene, he learned to lie still beneath the clang of iron. While other children heard lullabies, he heard the screams of fire from the furnace. While others heard fairy tales, he was told how to temper steel so it wouldn't snap in an eastern wind. Maybe you think that sounds sad, but ask Callista, would she have chosen a different path? No, because from that very day, she knew one thing. Irene didn't need a miracle, he needed will. He didn't grow up dreaming of becoming a god. He grew up wanting to be someone who never bowed, not even to those cloaked in divine glow. And that's why this story doesn't begin with wonder. It begins with silence. The silence of a child who didn't know the world had already forgotten his birth. The silence of long nights where Callista stayed awake, counting each weak breath her son took. The silence when she chose not to send him to any temple, not to lay him before any altar. You don't need them, you just need to grow strong. And if you're listening to this around midnight, curled up under a blanket with a fan blowing. Then imagine this. A baby with no blanket, no fan. Just a rag and his mother's breath wrapping him in courage. I don't know if you believe in myths, but I believe in Callista. Because if you'd seen how she tied broken shoes with metal wire, you'd understand why Irene never asked, "Where's my father?" Because some mothers don't need anyone beside them to become an empire. And some children, just being born is miracle enough. You know, some children are raised by wolves and become legends. Irene was raised by doubt and whispers. From the moment he could walk, fingers pointed. Not because he was cute, but because he doesn't look like anyone here. Not like his mother, not like the neighbors, and definitely not like anyone the village felt comfortable standing next to. "Whose kid is that?" they whispered behind Callista's back, but loud enough for Irene to hear. He didn't have an answer, and really no one wanted him to. While other kids learned to pray at altars, Irene learned to pretend he didn't hear the insults. He grew up between hammers, anvils, and selective silence. Callista taught him how to tend the fire, how to strike steel, and how to endure. Not just hunger, though that too, but to endure being shoved, being called freak. He once asked her, "Did I do something wrong?" Callista just shook her head and placed a hand on his chest. "No, your heart beats. That's enough." And that was enough for a child who had to grow up expecting nothing from anyone. Once, he helped put out a fire at an old man's house in the village. The man stared at him for a long while, then said nothing, just closed the door. I don't know what you'd call that, but I call it a superpower. Not Irene's, but society's. The ability to ignore kindness if it comes from an outsider. And Irene? He went home, brushed ash off his hands, and kept working. Not out of nobility, but because as long as there was work to do, there was a reason not to overthink. Callista once said, "We don't need them to believe. We just need to believe long enough to make it through." That line sounded better when she said it. Trust me. In the village, Irene was different. Outside, he was no one. He once tried leaving the mountain and living in the neighboring town. 3 days later, he returned without a word, and from then on, never mentioned it again. He had no magic teacher, no dream of becoming a hero. Only calloused hands, a slightly hunched back, and a silence growing heavier in his mind. Irene once wondered, if I'm truly the child of a god, then why am I like this? That question repeated like a hammer in the forge. Steady, relentless, without end. Have you ever felt like you were a draft of a grander idea, but left unfinished? That's how Irene lived. Unedited and unread by anyone. And Callista? She still forged iron, laughed a little less each year. But in her eyes, Irene was the one creation she never needed to fix. One day he saw a child playing with a dog. A small moment, but he stood watching for a long time. Not because he liked dogs, but because it was the first creature that didn't fear him. A few days later, the dog disappeared. People said it was taken by the god's hunters. Irene laughed, not because it was funny, but because he was used to it. And if you're wondering, where's the magic in all this? Don't worry, it hasn't arrived yet. Because life never left room for miracles to come on time. If you're waiting for a thunderous awakening moment, a divine lightning bolt, well, I once thought that too. But no, nothing came. No lightning, no rainbow, no whisper from the heavens. Just the sound of his stomach. And it growled loud enough to summon a beast from another dimension. That was the only miracle Irene ever had, that gnawing hunger. While other heroes had glowing swords or flowing capes, Irene had a piece of dried fish. Specifically, burnt dried fish, the kind you eat while trying not to think where it came from. And if you're imagining a cozy campfire, nope. It was a smoke-stained straw stove and a face covered in soot. Instead of an old mentor declaring, "You are the chosen one," Irene had a neighbor yelling, "Kid, you burned my pot again." There was no sacred hill for Irene to climb and discover his destiny. He only climbed onto rooftops to chase away hens laying eggs on his bed. And yes, that was his private room, an attic patched with dented tin and the scent of cat pee. You think a god would send a sign? Hisus didn't even send a birthday card. No cake, no candles, just cold ashes in the stove and rain tapping the roof like, "You're still not special, kid." Irene used to wait. You know, like one day someone would say, "It's time." But the only one who ever came was the tax collector. And he came to take their last half potato. Even so, Irene survived. He learned to collect ashes, light fires, boil turnip skins, and reheat soup from 2 days ago. No spells, just one survival recipe. Don't starve, don't stand out, don't believe in fairy tales. The only myth he ever heard was from a drunk claiming he fought a talking deer. Spoiler, the deer won. And Irene laughed, because at least the deer had a story to tell. And what did he have? A forgotten name and a bowl that never filled. You know that feeling, right? When you're not chosen, not called, not even on the backup list. Irene was the kind of character mythology forgot to write, because he had nothing cool to offer. No shiny helmet, no white horse, no Titan descendant claiming him. Just rough hands and a stomach that spoke louder than he did. While other kids were told tales of Olympus, Irene was told to stay away from the drunk priest at the village edge. While others learned to summon thunder, he learned to dodge rat traps and still get the bread. And you know what's funny? He pulled it off. I'm not joking. Irene knew how to survive, even when the world kept saying, "You don't belong here." Every time it rained, he didn't look up for help. He ran out to catch water because the well ran dry yesterday. It wasn't a miracle. It was logic, and sometimes logic keeps you alive. As for the gods, they were still napping. No god ever showed up. But maybe he didn't need one, because Irene got used to the silence of the stars and the familiar growl of an empty stomach. Isn't it strange? A child with divine blood, yet not one god ever mentioned his name. As if the world deliberately forgot he existed. But Irene didn't forget. He remembered every time he was ignored, every look of disdain, and the salty taste of tears over cold rice. And when you've been forgotten long enough, you start thinking of ways to make them remember. Not with miracles, but with stubborn existence. So one morning, Irene stood up, like someone with nothing left to lose, and that's when the real story began. In the village where Irene grew up, one thing was common: the chosen child. You know, the kind who glows when touching an ancient stone and suddenly speaks dragon. Or the baby girl who names the stars at birth, then prophesies, "There will be acid rain next year." And each time, the whole village would gather and chant, "Another warrior is born." But Irene, he didn't glow. He smelled like firewood smoke. Instead of prophecies, Irene sang off-key folk songs while chopping wood. And his special skill? Not tripping while carrying a firewood bundle twice his size. I know what you're thinking. Maybe that's his hidden power? Nope, just survival skills. While the chosen ones were sent to train with shamans, Irene was called to light the stove. The one time he was invited to a ritual was to carry the statue, not to lead the ceremony. And when people looked at Irene, there was no belief in their eyes. Just a "wait, he's still here?" vibe. Some kids were chosen to usher in a new era. Some were promised to save mankind from eternal darkness. Irene, he was chosen to be the firewood that burned evenly through winter. A village elder once said, "His path is the silent path." Sounds deep, until you realize he meant that kid's not going to do anything significant. Every time Irene looked at the sky, he didn't see destiny, just smoke from the kitchen fire stinging his eyes. But you know what's worse? He started to believe it was true. "Maybe I was born just to clean up sheep poop," Irene once muttered while carrying a bucket in the freezing wind. No one ever told him he was special. No one ever expected anything from him. And in a world full of miracles, not having one is its own kind of curse. I know you're expecting a twist, but no, not just yet. Because sometimes tragedy doesn't come from what you lose, but from what you never had. We love stories about heroes starting from nothing. But Irene, he started from less than zero. Not because he was unworthy, but because no one ever gave him a chance. Every child had a destiny, a legend, a symbol, a prophecy. Irene had a rope for tying firewood and a wooden bucket with a hole. I'm not saying those things are useless. I'm just saying they don't exactly scream destiny. If life were a mythological game, Irene was playing in peasant without magic mode. But don't look away, because from those ashes the real story begins. This story starts on an afternoon that smelled of dried fish, rotting wood, and thin soup. Irene was 12, old enough to stay quiet, but not old enough to understand why he should. During an argument at the market, someone called Irene the bastard without a father, and Irene, in his honest tone, replied, "I do have a father. My father is Hisus." The air froze like leftover soup overnight. Then smack, a slap like thunder from the village fortune-teller. Not because Irene lied, but because he dared put a god's name on his common lips. "You dare defile the divine by claiming to be his child?" she roared. No one objected, because in that village one thing mattered more than truth, order. And Irene, a boy with no naming ritual, no sacred guardian, had just violated that order. He was dragged out of the market like a cat that broke a pot. No one stood up for him. His mother watched from afar, basket in hand, expressionless, as if she'd expected it. That night, Irene asked her for the first time, "Who is my real father?" And she replied like speaking of a stranger, "A limping man who knew how to forge. No divine light, no destined love. Just a rainy night, a stranger, and a forbidden name." Irene didn't cry. He just stared at the kitchen fire and thought, if he's the god of fire, why isn't this flame warmer? That night, Irene dreamt of a man with iron hands forging a red-hot sword, but his face was always turned away. Irene ran to him, calling father, but the dream faded like smoke. The next morning, his mother said, "Never speak that name here again. If the god wanted to claim you, he would have." From then on, Irene understood. Some people live their whole lives with a loss they're not allowed to name. And some gods can forge weapons, but can't forge a word of acknowledgement. While other teens dreamed of victories, Irene had only one dream, and no face in it. No sacred stone bore his name. No legend told his tale. The name Hisus was worshipped far and wide, but no one dared link it to Irene, because he wasn't the son of a god. He was the typo in the god story, a crossed-out name, a question mark lost in a hymn. But the strange thing is, he still dreamed of the forge, still heard hammers on iron, fire roaring in the dark. Maybe Irene was never claimed, but that didn't stop him from hearing a call from a place he wasn't allowed to belong. And like all great stories, the first tragedy is always a slap, followed by a lifetime of asking why. I know this part is heavy, but this is Irene, a boy beaten for daring to believe in his bloodline. If you're still here, thank you for walking this far with us. Irene's story is far from over, and it only gets stranger. Leave a comment if someone ever denied your identity, because Irene knows that pain better than anyone. And don't forget to subscribe. The next chapters won't hurt less, but they'll go deeper. The fire hasn't died. The dream hasn't stopped. And somewhere, a sword is still being forged in the mist. This isn't a tale of gods. It's the tale of a forgotten boy. And we, those listening in the quiet of night, are the ones meant to pass that dream along. All right, take a deep breath. We're about to follow Irene into the darker part of the story. Irene left the village on a morning no one remembered, whether it was foggy, because no one said goodbye. There was no farewell ceremony, no wreaths, no farewells, no divine trumpet echoing from the distant hills. Only a rock-hard piece of bread his mother shoved into his hand, and a silent look. Honestly, it made sense. Who would see off a kid who once got slapped for telling the truth? Irene didn't know where he was going, but leaving was better than staying and getting slapped again. He walked through forests, through fields, past the rice paddies where villagers once poured boiling water to banish spirits. Every step was Irene reminding himself, don't turn back. No one's calling your name from behind. No map, no compass, only a hazy memory of a limping god with a singing hammer. Sounds mythological, doesn't it? A powerless youth, chosen by no one, setting off to find his father. If you think heroes always start with a prophecy, not this time. No one said, "Irene, you are chosen to save the world." Just Irene and the question, if he really is my father, why didn't he ever return? On the road, he passed many villages. Some spoke of Hisus. Some dared not mention the name. Irene began to realize even gods have coverage areas, and some regions are blacklisted. An old woman at a night market said, "Someone once saw a blacksmith step out of a volcano." When Irene asked for more, she replied, "I just say that for fun. Who believes in that stuff?" Then she sold him 2 boiled potatoes for double price, because he looked clueless. The more he traveled, the more Irene realized. The world is full of rumors, but short on answers. Some places worship gods out of fear. Others scoff and call it folklore. And each night, Irene lay under a strange roof, hugging his mother's hard bread, dreaming of a green flame in a forge. You know those dreams? The kind where you wake up feeling fooled, but still want to fall back asleep to dream again? And if you're thinking, here comes the turning point, sorry, not yet. Irene hadn't met a god, hadn't seen a beam of light, and still hadn't been hungry enough to eat the stone bread. That might have been the day's greatest achievement. No broken teeth yet. Once, he overheard 2 blacksmiths mention a half-god man who passed by. Irene asked, "Did he limp?" and got stared at like a lunatic. Stories of gods always seem to get silenced just when you get interested, like someone doesn't want you to know the truth. Or maybe the truth is too silly to share. Sometimes Irene wondered, am I going somewhere? Or just leaving a place no one wanted me in? And if that question made you pause, welcome to Irene's default state of mind. Because this grand journey had no epic soundtrack. Just a growling stomach and rain dripping down his collar. A blind prophet once told Irene, "You will find your father when you stop searching." But he said that to everyone, even lost kids at the market. No one's sure if he was really blind. He kept asking people for money. The farther from the village, the clearer one truth became. No one's waiting at the end. No throne, no medal, maybe not even a father. But sometimes those not chosen go the furthest. And even without cheers, Irene kept walking. Not because of destiny, but because he had nothing left to lose. You're still here? Then you've already gone farther than anyone in his village. And that is the first step in a journey no god dared to write. One day, unremarkable, Irene reached the gates of Olympus. No greeting, no guards. You expected fire dragons? Divine soldiers? No, just a slightly ajar gate. He knocked, once, twice, then pushed it open. No one cared. The gods were busy. One was checking her mirror. One live-streamed a sacrifice. One counted followers. Irene said, "I'm the son of Hisus." And immediately, someone burst out laughing like he claimed to be a flying sausage. "Hisus? That limping guy in the volcano?" asked one god without looking up from lunch. A goddess added, "I thought he died already?" A thunder god shrugged. "Don't remember any banquet inviting his kid." Irene tried again. "He once loved my mother, Callista. She was a blacksmith. AAA Callista. Best toast in the South Volcano." One god slipped. "I mean, who?" You know that feeling, like showing up to a class reunion and realizing no one remembers you went to that school. Irene stood among gods exchanging snake wine and taking selfies with talking swans, hoping someone would ask, "What's your name again?" But no one asked. No one cared how long he'd been standing there. He asked to speak with Hisus. A wind god turned and said, "He's not here. Not anywhere, actually." Irene asked, "What do you mean?" and got back, "I mean, he vanished, like a system update that never finishes downloading." Another god suggested, "Want to meet Hisus? Ask Sharon. Maybe he's paddling around the underworld." Irene didn't get mad. He just stood there, because these mockeries somehow made more sense than his father's silence. In one corner, a younger god whispered, "You really Hisus's kid?" Irene nodded. The god shrugged, I once thought I was Zeus's son. Then my mom said, she drank the wrong offering. Good luck, he patted Irene. At least you're still searching. Irene thanked him, then walked on through halls of divine light, where only names on the list mattered. There was no list with his name, no statue that looked like him, but there was a broken statue, leg missing, tucked in a dim corner. Irene stood before it longer than usual. He didn't know why. Maybe because its right leg also bent slightly. No miracle happened, but no one chased him away either. And maybe that was already a good start. That night, Irene slept under the temple gate, beside two divine cats arguing in Old Sanskrit. When you're the son of a god no one remembers, sleeping on the porch somehow fits the theme. He dreamed of the forge again. But this time he wasn't just watching, he was holding the hammer. And in that dream no one asked who he was, because he was making something they couldn't. The next morning, Irene woke up and knew he had to keep going. Not to be remembered, but so he wouldn't forget. He left the temple at dawn, while the sun god was still busy checking his own brightness. On the road, an owl flew by, didn't say anything, just gave him a look. The kind that says, "Oh, you're still alive?" Irene chuckled, first time in days. Not because he was happy, but because he knew he was in the wrong place. There's a kind of silence, not being forgotten, but no longer needing to be remembered. And in that moment, Irene felt closer to the gods than ever before. Not because he was a god's son, but because, like them, he had no idea who he really was, but kept walking anyway. A kid no one ever asked the name of, now walking a mythic path, without an invitation. From now on, if anyone asked, "Who are you?" he'd say, "I'm the one who doesn't need to be remembered, just allowed to walk." And if no one believed him, that's fine. Because if gods really exist, they'd be witnesses to this journey. And if they don't, Irene shrugged. At least, he still went farther than all those who waited to be called. After many months, Irene finally stood before the gate made of white bone and black bronze, where Hisus was said to dwell. He didn't knock because the gate was already open. That was strange. Even stranger, no guards at all. Irene stepped in, expecting war horses, the clang of forges, and sacred firelight. But the first thing he heard was a groan from the god trying to crack his back using a stone bench. "Who's there?" Hisus asked without turning, his voice raspy, like someone with a cold who just smacked their head on a sacred axe. "I'm Irene," the boy said, steadying his voice. "Your son and Callista's." A long silence, then a choking sound, like someone either gagged or looking for a polite rejection. "Sorry, wrong person," said Hisus. Irene frowned. "You seriously don't remember my mother?" Callista. Hisus repeated like flipping through a mental address book full of typos. Maybe. I've passed through many villages." "You stayed for 3 nights, then left," Irene said. "You left her. And me." 3 nights don't count," Hisus shrugged. "I spent an entire winter with someone named Lyria. She said she had a kid too." Irene smiled faintly, not happy. The kind of smile that says, "Ah, got it now. So, I mean nothing to you." "Not exactly," Hisus said, looking up for the first time. "You seem spirited. Not everyone dares to come here." "Because I'm human," said Irene. "I came because I need to know, not because I'm chosen to." Hisus nodded, like deciding on a bland lunch. "Fair, but I don't need more kids, to be honest." Irene was silent, staring at him, not with hate, more like, "Thanks, now I know for sure." "You can reject me," he said, "but I'm still your son, paper or no paper." Hisus snorted. "Paper what?" "It's okay," Irene shrugged. "I'll leave. No demands? Don't want a weapon, divine power, or at least a good luck blessing?" "No," Irene said. "I just wanted the truth, and I got it." He turned his back. His legs still trembled, but his steps were steady. Behind him, Hisus sighed, maybe because of his back pain, or maybe because of a son he would never understand. The door closed behind Irene, slowly, heavily, but it wasn't locked. A person unacknowledged, unembraced, unnamed, still walked away as if he chose the ending himself. On the cold stone steps, Irene sat for a while, didn't cry, didn't scream, just breathed. The sky above had no rain, no sun, just gray, like the black stone once used to forge divine swords. "So that's my father," Irene whispered. "Fair enough. No one saw him off. No one called him back." But for the first time, Irene didn't feel empty. There was something in the rejection that made him realize he didn't need acceptance to exist. Every step after that felt lighter, as if he had just dropped a name. No longer son of Hisus, just Irene, a name he kept, lived, and called himself. Because in the divine realm, sometimes the only thing you truly have is yourself. And sometimes that's enough. If you ever hoped for an ideal father, well, sorry. But if you've ever been rejected, then you know it might be the beginning of something much stronger. That night, Irene slept in the forest. No fire, no cloak, just a few leaves too small to be called cover. He dreamed of Hisus, but this time the god was playing dice with a two-headed goat. He woke up to a roar. A wandering demigod, named Carnos, emerged from the forest's edge, drunk and furious because a mortal took a divine sleeping spot. "Oh great," Irene sighed. "I just wanted one peaceful night." But no, the universe thinks this is hilarious. Carnos didn't respond. He charged forward like an actor in a low-budget play with way too much CGI funding. Irene dodged the first blow, not out of skill but because he slipped. What happened next was instinct, or desperation, or both. Irene punched, one hit, straight to Carnos's chest, and heard a crack. Maybe ribs? Horn? Ego? Carnos flew 3 meters, slammed into a tree, and passed out with a grunt that sounded like getting kicked out of a video game. The forest went silent. Irene looked at his hand. No spark, no aura, just a hand. What the heck just happened?" he whispered. No one answered, of course, except the owl on a branch staring like, "That's a first, bro." Irene sat down, hands still shaking, not out of fear, but because part of him felt happy, not for winning, but because, for the first time, he wasn't weak, not pushed around, not looked down on. The next morning, as sunlight pierced through the leaves, Irene walked with his back a bit straighter. A demigod still lay there, breathing. Good. He hadn't killed anyone. But now the world knew he could do more than chop firewood. "All right," Irene muttered. "If he doesn't want to claim me, then let the universe do it." And the universe, or at least the small campfire glowing in the distance, seemed to be listening. From afar, a group was approaching, carrying flags, symbols, and a beast like a lion with wings. "Oh no," Irene whispered. "Don't tell me I just made it onto the mythical world's live broadcast." But yes, they saw it. And in this world, when you defeat a demigod, even once, you're no longer a nobody. You become the one who might. And that's enough to bring both trouble and hope. "All right then," Irene said, with the voice of someone who hasn't slept in 3 nights and just drank resentment-flavored coffee. "If I have power, I'll use it. Not to prove anything. Just so I'm not dismissed anymore." Wind brushed past his torn sleeve. No glory, no soundtrack, just a teenager with scraped hands and an awakening heart. It wasn't a miracle, nor fate, just someone finally got angry enough to stop accepting everything. And sometimes that anger is the only miracle you need. You know that feeling, when things start to seem too strange to be a coincidence? That's when Irene began asking questions no one could answer. Not the cliché, "Who am I?" stuff, but more like, where did that punch come from? Because clearly, he had just punched a demigod off a cliff. And before that, he'd only ever landed punches on firewood. No thunder, no booming voice from above, just a very real punch. Could it be my father left something behind? Irene wondered, then immediately scoffed. Yeah, probably just disappointment. But you know what's funny? We only question if we have power when we accidentally do something unusual. When you've lived your whole life being rejected, one abnormal moment becomes a crisis. Or maybe, I really am not normal. Irene started testing it again. Sneakily punching rocks, climbing rooftops, taking deep breaths and leaping. Didn't die, didn't break bones, didn't get struck by divine lightning. He slumped down, staring at his hand like it belonged to someone else. If I'm a god, then what kind of god am I? Definitely not the god of memory. No one remembers who he is. Not the god of healing. He couldn't heal his mother's pain. Not the god of war. He hates fighting unless forced. Maybe the god of those left behind. And if you're watching this at 2 a.m. alone, you get it. The world doesn't need you to have a title. It just needs you not to collapse. Irene didn't know if he had divine power, but he knew he wasn't going back to being that nameless wood-chopping boy. Instead, he walked on like every step was an experiment. Can I hear the voice of the wind? No, but he still closed his eyes to try. Can I summon lightning? No, but he still raised his hand to the sky because why not? You've done it too. Standing in front of the mirror, pretending to be a superhero. Sometimes belief doesn't need logic, just life and a bit of curiosity. Irene didn't know if he was special or just the only one who still believed he could be different. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start a legend. No trumpets, no gods blessing him. Just him, a dusty path, and a tiny voice inside saying, keep going. And what about you? Have you ever felt like something is burning inside you? Maybe you're not the child of any god, but who said you can't dream? And if you're still watching this, thank you. Because you and I, we're probably both still searching for something. Don't forget to leave a comment and tell me, do you think Irene really has power? Or was it just a lucky punch? And a heart that dared to believe in something no one ever taught? Some people save an entire village from monsters and get forgotten before dawn. Irene was that kind. No honors, no statues, no names in history books. But that night, when a creature crawled out of the forest, slimy, gray, and whispering the names of the dead, Irene didn't wait for anyone to declare him the chosen one. He just grabbed a hoe and charged in. No glowing sword, no golden armor, just the same hoe he once used to chop wood. And somehow it was enough. The villagers looked at him like they were seeing him for the first time. An old lady screamed, "He's the son of a god. He's Icarus." "No, ma'am, wrong god, but thanks for noticing." Someone else asked, "What's his name again?" "Isrin, Indra, Irene, that's your name. But don't worry, you only just remembered it yourself." What followed was the strangest week. Irene healed people with boiling water and forest leaves, patched burnt houses, and chased snakes from wells. No one declared him a saint. No shrine was built. But oddly, the villagers began greeting him. A child slipped him a roasted potato. An old man called him "my boy" for the first time. Not because they thought he was a god, but because he was there when they needed someone. And I think maybe that's the simplest definition of a hero. Not a crown or a halo, just being there at the right time. But one day, a poet passed through the village. Skinny hands, curly hair, and a loud mouth. He wrote down every strange tale except Irene's. "Not mythic enough," he said. "No royal blood, no tragic deaths. So, saving people isn't dramatic enough? Being kind isn't cool enough? History is cruel to those who survive." Irene watched the poet leave. Not angry, not sad. He knew he didn't need anyone to write his story. Because that night, around the village fire, a few whispered about him. No rhymes, no epic songs. Just, he helped Granny Hela, did you know? He pulled little Lyra from the snake hole. And to Irene, those whispers were worth more than any epic. Myths don't have to be carved in stone. Sometimes they're written with muddy hands. If you've ever done something good without being noticed, you and Irene share something. Leave a comment and let me know. Have you ever helped someone anonymously? And don't forget, If you think this story is worth spreading, then give it a like, a subscribe, and maybe a quiet whisper to someone else. Because maybe all real legends begin like this. Someone not famous doing something small that no one else dared to do. No statue was built, no name carved, no tale recorded for Irene. After generations, only fragments remain, mixed with the wind and soot of old forges. The gods forgot. The people who lived with him forgot. The village isn't even on the map. But tonight you've heard it, and that changes everything. Because if even one person remembers, then Irene never truly vanished. His story doesn't lie in history books. It lives in a dream, maybe even yours, tonight. I wonder, are you still awake, or already dozing off as Irene picks up the rusty hammer again? If you're still listening, just leave a simple comment. I remember. We read every single one. Trust me, those whispers are never small. And if you think this tale is worth retelling, you know what to do. One like, one subscribe, and maybe a share to someone else who's ever felt forgotten. We don't need to be gods. We just need to be human who know how to listen. And remember, some heroes need no armor, just a campfire and quiet resolve. Irene never needed a halo. He just needed someone to believe he was real. And you did that. Right now. Right here. I know you might be listening at midnight. Lights off. A breeze drifting in. Thank you for staying till the very last line. Not everyone does. If you're asleep, may your dreams be warm with firelight. But if you're still awake, know this, you just revived a legend. Not with blood, but with memory. Irene was the forgotten child. But tonight, you're the one who remembered. Oh, and if you're still awake, leave a comment below. I really want to know, are you still up? Haha. Hello everyone. Tonight we're starting with a topic that's a little dark. A time when people lived with plagues, bizarre punishments, and dishes you definitely don't want to try. This is real life in the Middle Ages. No glitter, no illusions, just surviving a single day was enough to become a legend. Right now, I'll take you back in time to the year 1250 and turn you into a real European peasant. So, if you're not afraid of a few chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and lie still, the night is long. Check if the lights are off. Adjust the fan breeze gently. And if you're using air conditioning, remember to pull over a thin blanket. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let yourself drift back to a year when most people didn't live past 35. That's 1,250. There's good news and bad news. Which do you want first? Well, the good news is you just woke up. The bad news is you'll wake up like this every day, until one day you won't. The bed beneath you is not a bed. It's a pile of straw, bugs, and hope that rotted away last winter. No night lamp, no essential oils, just the scent of feet, goat droppings, and something you hope isn't human. Here, darkness isn't gentle. It's thick, heavy, and always comes with coughing, teeth grinding, and howling wind like God's own sigh. Planning to stretch? Careful, the rats might see that as a declaration of war. Your spine groans like a collapsing kitchen door, but no one hears, because everyone hurts just like you. That's not sunrise outside. It's the church bell acting as your alarm, and it never apologizes. A new day begins. No coffee, no morning kiss, just cold, itches, and despair. This is where we begin. Not with glory, but with truth. You might not survive a single day. Welcome to what they call a bed. Basically just a pile of straw infested with lice. Maybe you dreamed of a mattress last night, but this morning your neck aches like something heavy sat on it. There's no pillow. That lump under your head is a rolled up sack, and it reeks enough to wake you instantly. Every time you turn, the straw crackles like someone plucking a small animal beneath your back. The most familiar smell each morning isn't bread. It's feet. Yours or someone sleeping beside you. You wake up to snores mixed with a cow's heavy breathing, because your bedroom is shared with family and livestock. If you smell something burning, don't hope for coffee. It's probably chicken poop steaming on the damp floor. You try to rub your eyes awake, but your hands are frozen stiff and still covered in last night's dry dirt. There's a red bite on your neck, maybe a bedbug, maybe a spider, maybe something you'd rather not know. Light peeks through the cracks in the wooden wall, just enough to show you're still wearing last winter's unwashed clothes. Wind sneaks through the gaps, brushing your legs like a whisper. Still alive? But should you be? A rat scurries across your face. No permission, no knocking, and you just sigh and lie still. Someone next to you coughs violently, but you're too tired to check if they're still breathing. You sit up, back aching like you were dragged across rocks, knees screaming from the bone-deep cold. You look around, your father's already awake, yelling at someone, usually your mother or God. Your little brother's scratching lice. He's not ashamed. No one is anymore. You don't look for slippers. Not because you're lazy, you just don't have any. Your first step on the floor is a nerve test. The ground's as cold as stone, and something squishy slides underfoot. The only warmth you feel is from the cow's breath beside you, and you quietly thank it for not kicking your head last night. You yawn, and the first sensation is a metallic taste in your mouth. A clear sign of some illness yet to be named. No clocks, just the distant sound of church bells, waking even those who wish to stay asleep. Your mother lifts the pot lid. There's nothing inside, but she does it every morning like a hopeless ritual. A chicken jumps onto your bed, not to greet you. It just laid an egg in your shirt. You consider complaining, but remember, you had nothing to eat yesterday. Keep the egg. Count it as luck. The morning light highlights every crack in the hut, and the bird poop that just fell onto your hand from the roof. A new day starts with you not remembering when you fell asleep, only that sleep was a battle. Every morning here isn't a beginning. It's a continuation of yesterday's exhaustion. You try to stand, legs numb, eyes burning, neck stiff, and your back protests violently. Everyone shares the same thought. Did I really survive another day? But you get up, because there's no choice. Here, staying down is also a way to die. You pull back the tent flap, or rather, the rotting cloth, and greet the morning with a chest-rattling sneeze. It's so cold, your pee could freeze into frost. Thankfully, you don't have to go yet. Your neighbor trudges past with a blank face, like he's walking into a morgue. The baby next door is crying, but no one soothes it, because that happens every morning. Across the way, an old man is shaving with a stone, hands shaking but still persistent, even if there's barely any beard left. No coffee, no morning news, nothing new. Every day feels copy-pasted from the last. You think of last night's dream of a place with warm water, clean food, and soft beds, and chuckle to yourself. Here, even dreams are tiring, and waking up is the bravest thing you do each day. You've begun your day in a world where surviving till evening isn't guaranteed. And like every day in the Middle Ages, you don't expect much. Just hope you don't die a pointless death today. If you just woke up and need to pee, condolences. Where you're headed has no doors and definitely no toilet. You cross the soggy yard, feet sinking to the ankles, to find a hidden spot between the pen and the fence. It's cold, the ground is wet, and something rustles beside you enough to make you pause. Could be a chicken, a rat, or another kid dealing with the same business. You pull your pants down, trying to balance, but the wind whips your back like nature's own punishment. No toilet paper, just leaves. Pray they're not the spiky kind. You finish and there's no tap, no water. Maybe wait for rain, or wipe your hands on your pants like everyone else. Hygiene is something you've heard in the Bible, but never seen in real life. And you never thought needing to poop could be the reason you caught a disease. But here it can. Next to where you went is the village's trash pile from last week, reeking like history decomposing. No one cleans it because no one thinks it's worth keeping clean. You walk back, trying not to look at your feet. Whatever you stepped in might make you lose your appetite. If you're a woman, going to the bathroom means sneaking, worrying, and sometimes being more scared than walking the forest at night. They call it natural. But this kind of nature just makes you miss a tiled toilet like a distant luxury dream. Bathing? Oh, here it's a public event, which means everyone sees, everyone feels awkward, so most just skip it. You don't get to choose when to bathe. If there's water, you bathe. If not, wait till next month. Sometimes you think, if being dirty is normal, then being clean must be the real oddity. No one mocks you for smelling bad, because everyone smells bad. Here, body odor is part of your identity. You walk past an old lady and have to try not to breathe through your nose. She hasn't for a long time either. The last place you bathed was the riverbank. No soap, but plenty of fish, and the occasional floating rat corpse. You remember that day. The water was crystal clear, until the kid next to you diluted it with a small, sad event. You hand-washed your shirt, scrubbing like you were trying to erase a month of filth. The result? A fresh mildew smell. Clothes dried in the wind don't smell clean, just less wet. And you wear them like it's a blessing. Someone in the village claimed to have used fireplace ash to clean themselves. Judging by the result, you won't try it. Occasionally, the church hands out holy water, and someone actually used it to wash their hands after pooping. Seriously, you heard about a nobleman who built a private pooping room with bricks. The villagers thought he was insane. While you're wondering about bacteria, a kid nearby just licked his fingers after playing in mud. They say dirt makes you live longer, but here it just means dying a bit slower, and no one cares anymore. Every toilet trip is a battle between dignity and accepting reality. Reality wins most of the time. No privacy, no comfort, just you, wet grass, and the fear someone might walk by at the worst possible moment. If you're wondering, what about at night? Congratulations, you'll experience stumbling through mud in the dark. Many have slipped during nighttime toilet runs. Some never came back, not from kidnapping, but from pure shame. There's a village corner called the place everyone goes but no one admits. It's the nameless toilet graveyard. One time you heard clapping in the bushes. Turned out two people were sharing a toilet spot. Kids don't care. They go right at the front door. Adults do care but still do it during rain. You once asked, why doesn't anyone build a private toilet? Someone replied, we haven't reached that level of luxury. Centuries later, people will build things called restrooms and won't understand how their ancestors lived like this. But here, in the year 1250, a toilet is a fluid concept in both the literal and figurative sense. You can try to adapt, but every morning, every urge, every rain, they all remind you you're never really ready. This is a place where you don't need paper, because you've lost the pride to stay clean. You just need to survive. You just sat up when the smell of breakfast hit your nose, and there's nothing in it that makes you want to swallow. In the pot is something resembling porridge, if porridge was reheated 10 times and forgotten on the fire each time. This gray, thick, slightly burnt, with a few strange bits, and you really don't want to know what they are. The bread is hard as stone. You could use it as a weapon if you hit someone. You try to break off a piece and it snaps in two, and the crumb bounces off the ground. No milk, no butter, nothing to make it better. Maybe this is the original bread. The child next to you chews a piece without complaint, only because they don't know what real bread tastes like. There's a water bucket, but villagers say, don't drink. Last time someone did, they didn't need to eat again. Ever. Instead of water, people pass around a jug of thin, flat beer, like rainwater caught from a leaky roof. You take a sip, it's bitter in the mouth, warm in the belly, and your head feels just as empty as the scraped-out porridge pot. Breakfast here isn't to fill you. It's to remind you hunger is still around, and today won't be any different from yesterday. Every clink of chipped bowl and wooden spoon is like a sad note in the symphony of malnutrition. You look around. Everyone eats. No one smiles. No one expects anything. Everything is just repetition. An old man eats and coughs at once. A piece of porridge falls from his mouth. You try not to stare. Your mother blows on the pot, not to cool it down, but to blow away the moldy smell. Some chew without swallowing. They know the rest of the day might not offer anything more. Stomach growls are considered normal sounds, as familiar as a rooster's morning crow. An old lady nods and says, less burnt than yesterday. You're not sure if that's a compliment or surrender. The food smell clings to your hands, your hair, your clothes, and stays with you like an unwilling perfume. You try to finish your share, not because you're full, but to avoid being seen as someone living fancy in a place with no fancy. Fullness here doesn't come from food. It comes when your stomach is too tired to ask for more. Sometimes you wonder how people even survive these meals. Then you take another bite. Kids don't complain. They think this is normal. They've never known milk or real pastries. You see a child licking a spoon spotless, not because it's tasty, but because it's the cleanest thing they've touched today. A girl next to you wraps up a piece of hard bread, saving it for her father, who hasn't come home since yesterday morning. You whisper, "Anything for lunch?" And the person across just smiles like it's the funniest joke all day. After every meal, you don't feel better, just alert enough to start another day. Someone once said, "We eat to live," but here it feels like you eat just to prolong the exhaustion. The empty porridge pot is flipped upside down, tilting like the helmet of a soldier whose sword has snapped. You don't wash the bowl. There's no water, you just wipe it on your pants like everyone else always has. One rainy day, water dripped into the porridge pot, and everyone was glad. Thinner today, easier to swallow. And if you feel nauseous, don't worry. It means you still have senses. One time you spat out a mouthful of porridge, and your mother just said, "Don't waste it. Push it down. We'll cook it again tomorrow." No one throws food away. That's a worse crime than stealing. Theft might get you beaten. Waste gets you hated. You glance into the pot's bottom. The leftover is a blackened crust. Still someone's saving it. A child sucking their fingers. Eyes locked on your bowl like you're holding the entire world. You hand it over not out of pity, but because you can't take another bite. The child smiles, and you know for sure they'll grow up with a stomach trained to be empty. Breakfast ends like every day, with a growling stomach and the hope that lunch might be even slightly different. And you stand up, thanking your empty belly. At least it doesn't ask for too much in the Middle Ages. Think wearing old clothes is a vintage experience? Try living here, where torn clothes aren't a style, they're standard. One outfit, literally. From your birthday to your 10th death anniversary. The fabric is so thin you can see light through it, even when it's not daytime. Every time you sit, you hear a crack. Not sure if it's the fabric tearing or your knees freezing apart. Your pants don't have a front or back. All sides are equally muddy and smell like the cattle pen. Your shirt is stiff like paper soaked and dried on a smoky stove. The buttons are long gone. People use string. And when that breaks, well, let the wind in for ventilation. Shoes? If you're lucky, you have a pair with soles thinner than your faith in the gods. If not, you go barefoot, every step a negotiation with thorns, stones, and livestock dung. By now you realize human feet were not designed for the medieval world. Your head itches. Not from dandruff, from lice. The only living thing here thriving more than you. You scratch until you bleed. They still crawl, still lay eggs, still live better than you do. Everyone has lice. Everyone knows. And no one cares anymore. They've got bigger problems. Some shave their heads. Some use fireplace ash. Some pray to gods. But lice don't listen to anyone. You rub your collar and see a dark streak. Not mold, but dried skin from yesterday's scratching. Body odor? Fascinating. Everyone smells different, yet all have one thing in common. None smell good. The thickest coat you have is actually the layer of dried sweat stuck to your shirt all winter. When it rains, clothes double in weight and triple in cold. Goosebumps. Anyone? One time you fell asleep in the rain. Woke up with your shirt glued to your back like a wooden plank. Peeling it off? You lost a layer of skin. But hey, at least the lice left temporarily. No one changes clothes. They patch, sew, and stack layers like a failed mummy rebirth. You look at your hands, cracked like a geological map, and your nails black as farmland soil. Sour armpits, smoky kitchens, moldy blankets, blended into a cologne no one dares name. Every time someone pats your shoulder, you flinch, not from pain, but fear their shirt dust will stick to yours. When you scratch your back and hear a pop, don't worry, that's not a bone breaking, just a scab snapping off. Some say if you survive winter without changing clothes, you qualify as a living monument. Sometimes there's a laundry festival, but only when it rains, rivers rise, and no one is dangerously sick. You feel oddly happy when you discover a new hole in your shirt. At least it's more breathable. But then you ask, why am I still itching? Because besides lice, there are fleas, mites, and things you don't want to name. You sit there, in what used to be a shirt, scratching your head by reflex, realizing the only things enjoying life here are the parasites. Now let's talk about dental care. Think toothaches are just minor problems? Here it's a slow, painful death sentence. No toothbrush, no toothpaste, no dentist within 1,000 light years. You've got a toothache, and from then on, every meal is a battle between survival and infection. Starts as a tingle, then a throb, then the vein swells, turns red, and hurts so bad you bang your head against the wall for relief. No anesthesia, no antibiotics, maybe a knife, but it's for cutting vegetables, and the shaky hand of a half-baked blacksmith. Cavities aren't treated, they're pulled. No numbing, no disinfecting, just a rope and a scream no one cares to acknowledge. Dentistry here is a death match. You win if you survive the first yank. You lose if the wound gets infected and spreads through your blood, ushering you into a gradual exit. You could meet your ancestors because of one molar. Seriously. And if you survive, the socket gets infected and leaves a permanent crater as a lifelong reminder. People don't smile much. Their mouths full of black holes, broken gums, and breath like spoiled corpses. You don't speak loudly, for fear your loose tooth might drop mid-sentence. Every bite feels like the grim reaper leaning in. Someone tried rinsing with seawater and never spoke another word again. A lump under the jaw could turn you from healthy to corpse in 3 days. People back then didn't know what an abscess was. They just called it the evil swelling and started prepping a coffin. If you smile here, people might assume you're dying. And if you think, it'll pass after a bit of pain, then you're far too innocent. Because a toothache in the Middle Ages doesn't pass. It crawls into your heart and squeezes the last beat out of it. Welcome to the world with no dentists, where one cavity can write your obituary. And in times like this, divine intervention becomes the only hope. You'll pray for the pain to pass, but no one in the temple cares how you're begging. Around you are hunched worshippers, sobbing like the land itself is mourning. In one temple corner, an old man lights a torch with broken altar wood not for worship, but for warmth, and the fire flickers like his hope. The old seer mutters sacred phrases with great dignity, but no belief left behind the words. Yes, you could get dragged into a prophecy trance just for daring to look up at a broken statue. You hunch your shoulders, clutch your cloak, curl into a cracked stone pillar, and still wake up with frozen limbs in the morning mist. Your feet constantly trip over rubble scattered across the temple floor. Fingers grip the torch so tightly they go numb, trembling like they fear the flame might die in the night wind. No one remembers what sacred night means anymore. People just glance at you and mutter, another one begging for the gods to care. Now let's move to the moment the first silhouettes of the Dorian tribe appear on the hilltop, where the sun has just sunk behind a curtain of smoke. Sounds heroic, right? At least your house wasn't burned down? Wrong. By then, the fields looked like a sea of fire, just waiting for a spark to erupt into screams. No city stood whole, no village kept its roofs, and the concept of peace had gone extinct. You curl up in a rocky crevice, yet still can't escape the sound of hooves trampling your ancestors' graves. The Dorian soldier's breath reeks of grief and ash, blowing straight into the faces of the last fleeing souls. Wild beasts fled down the mountains, panicked by the flames and screams, from both raiders and refugees. Suppose you did escape, while screams thundered in your ears and the shadow of a raised spear loomed above. Firelight revealed the greed in the invader's eyes, and the glint of an axe sinking into someone's front door. Sounds like a war specialty, doesn't it? That's why, whether hiding in forests or beneath temple ruins, nowhere is safe from Dorian hooves in this era. One wrong step on the ash field, and you tumble into stone, wondering why you ever dreamed of tomorrow. Next time you admire a crimson sunset, remember, that's just the burning village reflecting off the sky. The elders said Dorian fire only stops when there's nothing left to burn. Sadly, they were right. You may have just stepped on a half-melted breastplate, with the stench of final battles rushing into your nose. One way or another, your heart won't thank you. Tonight, it'll throb in startled, uneven beats. A hoofbeat, a torch flare, or the chill when you realize the enemy just spotted you. You need an escape, but the wasteland offers only scorched weeds and blood-soaked mud. Tragic, isn't it? Living in a time when Mother Earth is reduced to a graveyard for shattered dreams of conquest. We started by staring at the barren grasslands, then chose to run instead of fighting a hopeless fight. Whether holding an axe or a broken spear, all you see is the enemy's shadow rising in the firelight. People fought not out of hatred but out of fear, afraid that not killing would mean being killed. In those days, every scream was a rushed goodbye, every night a gamble to see who would still be breathing by dawn. See someone fall by the roadside? Tomorrow night, that might be you. Clearly, the Dorian spears tonight won't leave anyone behind. The solution: run, hide, or pray the fire spreads fast enough that the enemy doesn't find you. Gulping down murky water mid-chaos is better than dying of thirst when the flames surround you. Some even believed bitter tree roots were better than falling into enemy hands. And yes, it was the enemy who burned the village, stole the grain, razed the temples, and pitched tents atop the graves. Imagine crawling into a rocky nook, listening to your house burn, too scared to even breathe. A full package night of smoke, blood, and tears. Feeling hopeless, trembling? Maybe because you just saw an enemy's shadow, spear gleaming in the firelight. Survival tactic? Silence, shivers, breath held, and hope the gods, if they still exist, look the other way. And if that doesn't work, brace yourself for being dragged from the brush like a beast from its cave. Now, if you hear a child crying in the distance, pray it's not your own. Now let's talk medieval jobs. Not a farmer? You'll still be swimming in animal guts, rawhide, and stench every morning. Forge, dye vat, tannery, each one just a step away from grilling yourself alive. Every deep breath adds a fresh coat of greasy smoke to your lungs. If you're a tanner, sorry, your smell alone could suffocate rats at the door. They say every trade is noble, but how noble can it be when the whole village avoids you due to weeks-old corpse stench? Think butchers have it easy? Wait till a pig's innards explode in your face. Some jobs end with a wash in ash, lemon, and despair. Meet a potter? He's halfway through burning his hand after opening the kiln in a wind gust. Meet a blacksmith? Hair scorched, skin peeling, fingers blistered, and it's only Monday morning. Any clean trades? Maybe, but probably only in someone's dreams. They said, labor is glorious. Here, glorious means you still have all your fingers. Kids learning trades get taught their first skill. Smell danger before something explodes. You could weave nets unless a fish takes a bite and leaves you with half a hand. Gate guard? 3 kicks a day, 5 insults a night. Night torchbearer? Good luck with the wind blasts, fire sputters, and burning hair. Who said glass blowing is artistic? Stand near a 1,000-degree furnace and see how long art lasts. The ox cart pullers smirk. At least they don't crawl inside pig carcasses. Textile stampers? Each press mashes a finger, and the dye stains for a week. Charcoal burner? Welcome to clothes that will never be clean again. Any clean jobs? Sure, if clean means coated only in the scent of death. Crematorium workers don't speak much, mostly because their lungs gave up long ago. Think craftsmanship is poetic? Here, every creation costs blood, burns, and chronic coughing. Even bakers aren't safe, mixing flour with pond water and hands that haven't been washed in weeks. One slip while carving meat, one overheated brick kiln, and you become a workplace accident. Trumpeter in a ceremony? Windburn, dust storms, numb lips, swollen jaw, all for a strangled horn note. No one asks, what do you do? Out of admiration, they're checking if you carry disease. On a good day, you might be burning coal, slaughtering sheep, and patching dung-covered clothes. The job chooses you not for skill, but because you're reckless enough to survive the week. Every cough brings out a mix of soot, smoke, and animal grease from memory. That's why these were called luck jobs. Bad luck, you die. Good luck, you die. A little later, when winter comes, you don't feel cold. You feel your skin stiffen in layers like bark. Wind creeps into the house from every direction, even with 3 layers of stone blocking the door. The first night, you can't sleep from the cold. By the third, your teeth are clattering nonstop. No fireplace, just white breath and kids groaning from frozen toes. Winter here doesn't come with pretty snow, only frozen mud and purple, swollen feet. Every morning starts by checking if you can still move or if you froze solid halfway through the night. Leaving the house isn't a concept. One more step and your knees go numb. When the water in the jar ices over, you start drinking the warmest thing left. Last season's flat beer. Kids huddle in the kitchen corner. Adults fake being full to save a spoon of porridge for the evening. You used to think cold was the problem? No. The problem is it lasts so long you forget what warmth feels like. Some homes use smoke to push the cold out, but it stings your eyes, chokes your throat, and haunts your sleep. Every gust of wind makes the walls shake like they're about to collapse. Cold doesn't kill you quickly. It wears you down until you can't even sit up. At night, the groaning isn't from stray dogs. It's from neighbors wasting away from hunger and cold. You bundle everything on top of yourself and still shiver like a leaf, because your shirt is damp, straw is moldy, and blanket is torn. If you think winter's torture, stay long enough for summer. As the sun rises higher, your home becomes a suffocating oven. No fans, no breeze, only flies buzzing around fermented urine. You can't breathe. The air is thick like wax, heavy with odors that make your head spin. Who sleeps in summer? Only those used to their heart pounding from dehydration. Every bead of sweat is a warning that someone might collapse in the yard today. Kids no longer run. They just lie down, staring at the ceiling cracked by heat. Adults reek right after lunch, and no one's surprised if someone faints on the porch. You open the door for air, but only the scent of dead rats and human waste wafts in. Flies land on your hands, in your eyes, and straight into the water pot you haven't even boiled. Every wave of the hand swats away dust and drags a few more bugs toward you. Summer isn't just hot. It's a never-ending suffocation that feels like living inside a tomb. When night falls, the heat doesn't drop. It just changes flavor. From burning to putrid. No one wants to sleep. No one dares stay awake. Every inch of floor oozes weird smells from the soil. And then you realize, every season can send you to meet your ancestors, just in different flavors of suffering. Home isn't a place of safety. It's where you count the hours, waiting for a death that won't be peaceful. No one sings in summer. No one laughs in winter. Only groans in the kitchen and broken snores on the floor. Touch the wall. In winter it stings like steel, in summer it sweats like grease. Try sneaking outside. Flies follow, dogs bark, and neighbors look at you like you've lost it. You can't breathe, can't sleep, can't eat, but you still get up before sunrise. Summer dust hangs like fog, sticks to your throat, and makes you cough through every meal. If someone dies at home, no one knows if it was the sickness or the weather. Cold makes your bones ache. Heat thickens your blood. Both dull your brain. You count rainy days like miracles. But when it rains, the roof leaks, clothes mold, and your feet rot. And then you realize, surviving all 4 seasons isn't normal. It's a personal achievement. When you think you're alone, remember hundreds of tiny creatures live with you, right on your skin. They don't knock, don't ask, and never leave. Every time you scratch your head, you're interrupting their banquet. You bathe, they don't care. The water isn't strong enough to wash off a 3-generation colony. You change your shirt, but they're still there. You didn't change your skin after all. Your bed is your fortress and their castle. You don't see them, but your skin does. Every bite leaves a mark. You knew the word lice before your ABCs. No microscope needed, you feel them through midnight itching. That cool feeling on your back at night is the damp floor and a bug crawling past. Every scratch doesn't just repel the enemy. It confirms you're still alive. Planning to catch each one? Schedule 3 weeks with no sleep. Everyone shares their body, some know it, others pretend they don't. No one admits they have lice, but one look at their old headscarf tells enough. Love is temporary, but bugs are forever. You grit your teeth not out of bravery, but because you're too tired to scream. One itchy bite becomes a third ulcer after just one restless sleep. A best friend may betray you, but bugs won't. They stick with you to the end. You may be too poor for shoes, but never too poor for parasites. Sit to rest, and a bug crawls up your arm like it's greeting you. Smell something strange? That's a cocktail of sweat, blood, and poop from nameless tenants. In the heat, they crawl faster. In the cold, they cling harder. You can shave your head, but don't be surprised when they return stronger in a few days. Bugs don't care if you're good or bad. If you've got blood, you're enough. You're never alone, especially when you wake at midnight scratching both armpits. Living with them isn't a choice. It's a survival rule. No one can get rid of them all, you just negotiate for fewer bites. No need for pets. The bugs have already filled the companionship role. If someone says they don't get bitten, there are only two options. They're lying or they've gone numb. And no matter how much you hate them, you have to admit, bugs know how to keep you from feeling alone. Mornings don't start anything, they just drag on what hasn't ended. You open your eyes not because you want to live, but because you haven't stopped yet. No one asks if you're okay. Everyone's too busy trying not to collapse. You work because stopping means nothing will be in your bowl tonight. You don't think ahead. Tomorrow is more blurred than a dream cut short. Hunger isn't as painful as pretending it doesn't exist. Someone beside you falls, you don't help, you step back to avoid being dragged down. Every step makes your legs protest, but you walk anyway, there's no other choice. Groans go unheard, they've become background noise. You don't need bravery, you just need to keep moving. Some days you don't remember what you ate, if you ate at all. You don't believe in happy endings. Just hope it won't be too cruel. Fear no longer has a shape, just the cold grip at your neck when you think of the future. Every time you look up, your neck aches, your eyes sting, and all you see is a sky full of dust. The elderly breathe slower, not from peace, but because their lungs are too weak to gasp. Children don't laugh loudly, not because they're well-behaved, but because they've never really known joy. You stop counting days, nothing's worth marking anymore. Someone still tells jokes, not to laugh, but to prove they can still speak. You work not to gain, but because stopping means losing everything. No one cries when someone dies. They just look at each other and wait their turn. You sit in silence at night, not to meditate, but because your legs can't stand anymore. The exhaustion doesn't come from labor, but from living hour to hour with no purpose. You don't say "stay strong" to anyone. Those words have lost all meaning here. When someone collapses, you just watch and wonder, why not me yet? No one has time to dream. Beautiful dreams cost more than warm blankets. You never sleep enough, not from being busy, but because even exhaustion can't bring rest. They call you resilient, but that's just another way of saying used to pain. You don't share what you've seen, because no one needs another tragedy. Your hands are calloused, not from work, but from going too long without being held. You try to stand tall, even though your back is curved from too many times bowing down. No one reminds you to live well. Everyone's too busy trying to survive. You don't cry at the sight of blood. Your tears dried up after too many losses. Every time you smile, it's forced, but you still do it, because no one can handle another hopeless face. You look at your hand and wonder if it's shaking from cold or fear. Dreams of a good day no longer come. You just hope today isn't worse than yesterday. No one talks about hope anymore. It was buried with those who once dared to dream. You don't hate anyone. Don't blame anything. Feelings are just another burden you can't afford. When night falls, you don't wish for light. You just hope no one sees you collapse. You keep living, not for any reason, just because dying still costs more than enduring. And if someone asks why you're still alive, the most honest answer is, because no one's dug my grave yet. You leave the field at dusk, not because the work's done, but because you can no longer see your hoe. Every step home feels like dragging the entire day behind your legs. Your back aches so much. Bending to pick up straw makes your heart race. You wonder what you ate today, then laugh because you can't remember. The ache in your jaw makes every bite feel like another round of torture. You sit on the hay, not caring about the moldy smell or bugs hiding beneath. No one tucks you in, and the cold bites as if testing your skin's limit. The coughing next door is the only lullaby you get tonight. You roll over, trying to find a pain-free position, but everywhere stings, aches, or throbs. A child cries in the night from hunger, and you can't blame them, you feel the same. Someone says aloud, "It'll be sunny tomorrow," but no one replies, because no one needs false hope. You think of tomorrow, and every part of your body protests the idea. Someone still keeps the fire burning, not for warmth, but to scare away the rats. You lie there like someone who just crawled back from a battlefield with no victors. Wind creeps through the wall cracks, reminding you the cold is saving its worst for before dawn. You close your eyes not to sleep, but because they're dry, sore, and tired. Someone quietly recites names of the dead. You just hope yours isn't on the list. No one promises anything now, only silence as thick as mud covering every thatched roof. You breathe softly, not to relax, but so you don't wake the hunger curling in your gut. The sound of mice in the straw annoys you, but you let it go, because it's less threatening than reality. You don't hope for sweet dreams, because even in dreams you're still plowing fields. Your hand forms a fist, not to fight, but to stop it from trembling. Nightfall brings no peace, only the illusion that everything has ended. You once thought there'd be a day of rest, but no such day was ever called rest. Every night is another survival, and every morning is the sentence continuing. You don't complain anymore, not because it stopped hurting, but because silence is a habit now. Someone whispers a prayer, but it never seems to reach the gods. You lie there, no shelter, no hope, no dreams, just raw existence. Someone snores loudly, and you're grateful they can still sleep. Another day ends, and if you're still breathing, you've won the cruel game of survival. No one pats your back, no lullabies, no one knows what you've just endured. You don't fall asleep willingly. It's like being dragged into exhaustion's gravity. The night has no end, only interruptions by the light announcing another day of misery. You don't know if you even slept, but when you wake, you'll crawl back to work. And if you don't wake up tomorrow, no one will scream. They'll just take your hoe and carry on. At day's end, life isn't bright. It's silent, cold, and gray like moldy straw. You hug your empty stomach like it's normal, because it is. No violins, no peaceful dreams. Just a life eroding with every shallow breath. And if you still remember your name in the morning, that's a rare win worth noting. So you've lived another day, no one celebrates it, but at least you exist to see it end. Now you know, living a day in 1250 isn't a fairy tale. It's a collective lawsuit filed against fate. No white castles, no charming knights. Just gallows, open latrines, and lice crawling under your shirt. Think you'll be a poet? Fine. Just bring a hoe and a jar for rainwater. Every poem back then was a lament written between stomach growls and chickens screaming at slaughter. Think being a prince was easier? Enjoy the royal signature dish. Egalitarian dysentery. Even kings had no toilet paper. In fact, they didn't even have toilets. Think love was romantic in the Middle Ages? Wrong, love letters were written on parchment tougher than morning bread. A sweet kiss back then came with bad breath, rotten teeth, and a healthy chance of infection. Getting married? Congrats. You've just signed a lifetime contract with hunger, illness, and rats in the bridal room. And if you're a woman, don't bother dreaming. At best, you'll get to choose between hauling water or non-stop childbirth. A child? You think you get to play? Nope. You're gifted a hoe and the blessing. Grow up fast so you can plow. Mornings smell of blood. Noons scream. Evenings serve watery porridge. And nights hiss with wind through straw. You haven't seen hell, but it looks a lot like a moldy shack in 1250, with bugs and coughing. And if you're a scientist, congrats, you'll be burned for saying the earth is round. An artist, painting, you'll be called a witch if you don't draw Jesus with enough reverence. Want to open a coffee shop? Sorry, coffee beans haven't made it to Europe yet. Want to chill in the garden? Go ahead. Flies, bugs, and horse poop will chill with you. Still dream of being an influencer? Back then, there were storytellers in taverns, like streaming but with tooth loss if you messed up the king's story. In short, Life in 1250 was a non-stop survival game with no retry button. And if you still want to go back, no worries. We've got a pile of straw, a broken hoe, and a louse named Hope waiting for you. You might ask, was anything good back then? The answer, if you survived past 30, you were the village legend. There was no social media, but gossip traveled faster than today's Wi-Fi. One sneeze at the wrong time could get you branded a witch. Whoever said, the old days were simpler and beautiful clearly only saw illustrations, not reality. Because medieval paintings couldn't capture the stench, the screams, or the blisters on your palms. Sitting with AC, a phone, and food delivery, saying, I wish I lived back then? Think again. Back then, ordering food meant picking it, digging it, or wrestling it from a chicken. Sleep early, rise early, it's healthy? In 1250, you slept from exhaustion and woke up because a rat ran over your face. So next time someone says, the Middle Ages were romantic, kindly hand them all 500 points above. Because surviving a day in 1250 didn't require armor. Just steel nerves, an empty stomach, and the will to let go. If you're reading this on a device with battery, light, and Wi-Fi, congratulations, you've won at life. Still longing for the medieval era? Don't worry, outdoor toilets still exist at some bus stations. Maybe you don't have pearly white teeth, but at least you have a toothbrush, a dentist, and painkillers. Maybe you're stressed, but at least no one's accusing you of witchcraft for feeling moody. And if tomorrow you complain breakfast sucks, remember the 10-day reheated watery porridge of 1250. No one's stopping you from dreaming. Just learn the difference between romance and delusion. Conclusion: the Middle Ages were a fancy invitation to a very earthly hell. One day in 1250 is a crash course in survival, where even exhaling could get you falsely executed. So if you still want to time travel, good luck. And bring toilet paper. If not, take a deep breath, raise your morning coffee, and thank the universe you weren't born in the 14th century. And now, let's see, we move on to the next chapter.